Now, what does that mean? Well, a video on healthy choices could look like a time you've been faced with a tough choice and chose a healthy route instead. There are many options for videos. Some other ideas could be an interview with someone on healthy choices, an informational video on ways you calm down when you're stressed, or a PSA on resources for youth. For inspiration, here are some clips from last year's winning videos.
Alternatives could include doing some sort of club, sport, or activity.
Like theater, drawing, track and field, or student council.
There are other things in life that time can be spent on. Instead of spending a fourth of life on screens, try learning a skill.
Meeting today is February 22nd. We're starting at 5:30 p.m., not a.m., at Courthouse Square. I'll note for the record that we do have a quorum present, though, as is, I think, evident, President Eno Host-Pressey is excused for the evening. She has asked me, Ian Davidson, to chair in her absence, which I will do so. And our first item is the safety moment. General Manager Pollock.
Great, thank you. So February is National Heart Month. So in recognition of that, I have some tips to help you prevent heart disease. First, get regular health screenings and know your numbers to include your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your BMI. And you can monitor these numbers through regular checkups. Also choose healthy eating habits, including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and foods low in saturated fats, cholesterol, and sodium into your diet. Get regular physical activity. Find activities that you enjoy and incorporate them into your daily routine, whether it's walking, biking, swimming, or participating in group fitness classes. Focus on controlling stress management. Practice relaxation techniques such as deep breathing, meditation, yoga, or spending time outdoors. Avoid tobacco and limit alcohol. Enough said right there. And take proactive steps towards improving your cardiovascular health in order to help reduce your risk of heart disease. And that concludes my safety message.
Thank you, General Manager Pollock. I just like to put a plug in there that one way to make cardio an easy part of your life is to just walk to your bus stop if you're able to regularly. That just fits it right into your life, and then you can de-stress while on the bus. So first up, we have a presentation on our customer satisfaction and community value survey presentation.
Great. I'll turn it over to our Chief Communications Officer, Patricia Feeney, to open it up.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. Good, and members of the board. Good evening. I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing Mr. Christopher Tatham, ETC's Institute CEO. Considered to be an internationally authority on survey research, Mr. Tatham has designed, administered, and conducted data analysis for more than 2,000 statistically valid surveys involving more than 3 million people on 4 continents during the past 30 years. This evening, he will share with you the results of the third wave surveys for customer satisfaction and community value. Mr. Tatham, the floor is yours.
It's great to be with you here tonight. And I was not actually the project manager for this project, but the results were so exceptional. I thought it would be good for me to actually present the results, because it's very rare that I see data in many ways is what you might say as good as this. Cherriots is definitely setting the standard for providing transit services and gaining support and perceived value in the community. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of share with you, see if I can get my screen going here, and just kind of walk you through some of the things that we found. So can everyone see this okay?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Well, anyway, you heard from the introduction. Our firm, we're based in Kansas City, but we're really a global research firm, and we were founded actually by my parents back in 1982 to really help local governments, whether it's transit agencies, libraries, cities, counties, to gather objective input from their communities and their customers to really help them make better decisions. Oftentimes, you only hear from the people who aren't happy with what you're doing, and sometimes that can make decision making difficult. We actually did a survey a couple years ago. I guess it was before COVID, and we asked people how many people had attended a public meeting in their previous year, and 7% of the people said that they had, but when we probed, it was actually less than 3%. You know, people thought they had been in the last year, but when they thought about it, it had been longer than that. And then when we asked them, well, what were the main reasons they went to that meeting, the number one reason was to get recognition or see somebody get an award. The second one was they didn't like what the local government was doing. Or number three was they wanted to change the way things were being done. So the average person doesn't typically show up and express their views. So I think your commitment to doing these kinds of surveys is really a testament for one of the reasons you're doing so well as an organization. And I say that in comparison to all the data I've seen over the years. So this is where we're going to go. I'm going to go through about 30 minutes worth of slides. There were 3 surveys, but these are probably the 5 things I hope you remember when we're all done. Number one, Cherriots is really perceived by most of your community to providing great value for the region, whether it's your customers, whether Lyft or bus or the community as a whole. You're really doing really well. Second, the reason I'm presenting is you're setting the standard for service delivery. We assessed your performance on your customer survey and also your community value survey in a number of areas, and each and every one of those, you rank above our national average, and in some cases, you're near the very top of what I've seen, particularly in recent years. Third thing is your customers support additional funding for transit in the Chariot system at levels that are much higher than I typically see, which again suggests you're providing great value for what people are receiving. There's certainly opportunities for improvement. I'm going to kind of go through those. You didn't do the survey just to get an award, so I'm going to try to give you some guidance on how you can use this to make better decisions moving forward. And then finally, residents who have taken the survey frankly feel they can get to most of the places they need to go. So some really good findings here, and I'm going to kind of walk you through each one. But I know I disappear and I go away, and you're the ones that use this information for decision making. So one of the things I want to walk you through is how we did the survey, the methodology, so you can feel comfortable with that. I'll do that for each of the surveys, and then I'll go through some of the findings for the customer satisfaction and Lyft surveys, and then next the community value survey. So that's what we'll be doing. So let me start off with the customer satisfaction or your customer survey, or folks who use the bus survey. This survey was administered last fall between October 30th and November 12th, and we conducted it both on board and also at some of your transit centers. And we know that you have a high percentage of people who don't speak English, particularly Spanish. So half of our team was actually bilingual. Our goal is to get 400 completed surveys to have good representation for both weekdays and weekends. And we designed the sample so it actually be done and proportionate to the ridership in the system, which was validated by the ride check we actually conducted for you last fall as well. So overall, great representation, great participation. Similar thing from your Lyft paratransit survey. That's still ongoing, but we wanted to share you the results. We'll probably get a few more surveys in the next couple of weeks. We have over 200 respondents now, so the results probably won't change. But again, it was provided in both English and Spanish. We did an initial mail out and then followed up by phone, email, and text. And so all in all, that's what was done. One of the reasons we do these surveys, frankly, is to understand who's using the services. And so one of the things I took a look at were just the demographic characteristics. And your gender, you see, is pretty evenly split between male and female. And that may not surprise most of you. You may just think that's the way it should be. Actually, most transit systems these days are having as much as 2/3 male to 1/3 female. And oftentimes that's related to concerns for security and other factors. The fact that it's split suggests that your system is perceived safe, and we see that in the results of some of the questions we asked your customers as well. You've got all ages using the service. You can see the bulk are under age 30, about half, but you also see you have a significant percentage, 10%, who over age 65. So again, serving all folks. You can see the races. I won't go through all of these, but about 1 in 4 of your respondents indicated they were Hispanic, Spanish, or Latino. And we also asked folks whether or not they spoke a language at home other than English, and nearly 1 out of 3 did. And of those who said yes, 75% reported speaking Spanish. So that's one of the main reasons we included the bilingual interviewers on board. We also asked people about their income, and it's not a surprise. You know, the highest percentage of people have lowest incomes. That's traditionally what we see. But we do have a significant portion, about 1 in 6, who actually have incomes of 50,000 or more per year. That's usually a function and only seen in systems that are actually providing good service, reliable service, where people have choices, choose to use transit rather than driving themselves. And you'll notice that the frequency of service is also relatively high. Over half the people who are using your system are using it pretty much every day of the week, 5 or more days a week. You have some less frequent service, but if you add in the people using it 3 to 4 days a week, you have 3 out of 4 people who are using your service at least 3 days a week, which is very impressive. In addition, you do a great job of retaining your customers. A third of your customers have been using your service for more than 5 years. And you also are attracting new customers. You can see about a quarter, 23%, have been using it less than 1 year. So again, from my perspective, when I look at all the data, you've got a diverse set of people using the system. You're attracting new people, you're retaining people who have been using the system for a while, and those are all characteristics of a good transit system. Second thing I want to share is just the impact that transit is probably having on the region's economy and other factors. You know, one of the things that sometimes people, when they hear public transit, they think it's a social service that just gets people who don't have cars around, but not necessarily helping the region's employment base. But you'll see actually the number one reason people are using the Chariot service is to get to and from work. And so, again, a lot of these folks have lower incomes, so they're doing types of jobs that are probably needed by employers in the region. And without transit, many of these people would not be able to get to work. And you can see that the people who responded to the survey felt your bus routes actually helped them access their employment better. And you can see over 3 out of 4 people felt that way. In addition, we asked people about their dependency on Chariot bus systems, and you can see 8 out of 10 said yes, but 17% said they were not. And most of it's because they were basically choosing to save money or just preferred to use the system over driving. So again, some positive findings that we found from the survey results based on who's using it. Perhaps this is the piece that I thought was most interesting, because a number of systems around the country are really struggling with perceptions of funding. Many systems have seen significant decreases in ridership since COVID, and that's causing some local government agencies to wonder, should we continue funding transit if people aren't using it? But what was interesting in your case, there's really strong support, and I'll show you later among the sampling of your non-users or your general community, but of your customers, both your paratransit, which is on the right, and your bus service on the left, there's strong support for increased funding. And that's not unusual, but you'll see the percentage that's negative is so low. It's just 1% among your bus customers, so a ratio of 53 to 1. And you know, a number of people oftentimes are just using it temporarily while they don't have a car. Perhaps they've lost their driver's license, but oftentimes to see these ratios of strongly agree to disagree at this magnitude really suggests that your riders, both the paratransit and also your regular bus, think that you're doing a good job using the resources that you have. And I think ultimately this is the reason I'm presenting today, is when I look at your results compared to what other systems and other transit agencies are doing nationally, you're really setting the standard. And before I share the results, just so you know, the base for this is our firm does an annual survey of about 8,000 to 10,000 U.S. residents in all states, all metro areas, all communities. And we do this to basically assess a wide range of local governmental services, everything from police to public transit to libraries. And as part of this survey, we ask people some of the same questions that were asked on your survey, so we can compare how does Cherriots' performance stack up to a true national average. And this is what we found. First, your overall satisfaction rating is substantially better than the national average. In fact, if you take a look at the national average, which is the bottom bar, a little over half of people in most systems or most communities give positive ratings for their transit service. In Salem and the Cherriots area, you can see it's 26% above that, with 84% of your customers giving positive ratings, and 37% of them being very satisfied. And you'll notice that the ratio of very satisfied to dissatisfied is 37-2, which is just tremendous. And again, when we looked at your Lyft customers, you can see similarly high ratings. Only 3% were dissatisfied, and you can see 90% overall gave positive ratings, with 53 giving very satisfied ratings. And you can see that 98% of your Lyft customers feel that your service is a value to the community. Not one of them disagreed with that. And sometimes we always say there's 3, 4, 5% of people out there that are just cranky and don't like things. That's not actually true. When you survey 201 Lyft customers, not one of them doesn't think you provide good value. That's really an unusual finding. Some of the other things that we looked at is just your customer service ratings. And I say these things because this doesn't happen overnight. You don't get great customer service in 1 year or 6 months. It's usually a result of years of development, becomes a culture of the people who work there. And you can see when we looked at the results of people, whether or not they said when contacting Cherriots customer service, their concerns are addressed promptly. 51% gave the highest possible rating. Altogether, 9 out of 10 people gave positive ratings. And the ratings for customer service representatives being helpful and courteous, not one of the people surveyed gave negative ratings. You can see 91% positive ratings. So this is a real testament to your employees who are interacting with your customers on a daily basis. And it's very rare for me to see these types of ratings, which is what the next couple charts share with you, are some of these results compared to our national average. You know, perceptions of safety, you're at 83% compared to nationally at 42%. This is for while you're riding the bus. When you're waiting for the bus, 69 compared to 35%. And the perceptions you can see of bus being clean is 39% above the national average. I may sound like a broken record on some of these charts, but you can see travel time is 26% above the national average. Your arrival time is 31% above the national average. Your bus frequency of your service is 16% of the average. So some of the things that are most important when it comes to system reliability rate extremely good. With issues related to convenience and price, you can see price is 20% above the national average. The location that the bus routes are positioned is 26%. Overall hours of operation, 13% above the national average. And even when it comes to information, this is really a testament, because sometimes you're not Los Angeles, you're not Dallas, you know, some of the bigger systems that sometimes invest more heavily in information systems. But in spite of that, your system rates significantly better for the ease of people understanding and being confident to navigate decision, their ability to get information about schedules and the services, and even your way that you keep people informed about schedule changes, all are significantly better than we see elsewhere. I also was pleased to see that your bus drivers get great ratings as far as how they operate the vehicles, their knowledge about the system, and again, their driver overall perceptions of being helpful and courteous. So lots and lots of accolades here. Again, like I said, this doesn't happen overnight. You don't create a culture of great employees, great customer service representatives, great operators who your customers really respect and think are doing a good job. And clearly you've been committed to doing this for quite some time. Last couple of things we asked folks we didn't have any national data for was just whether or not there's enough seating on the buses. 8 out of 10 people said yes. And whether or not your bus stations and shelters are well maintained, 2 out of 3 people said yes. So all in all, some great findings from your bus customers. Similarly for Lyft customers, 84% of them agreed that they are picked up within their scheduled window. 95% viewed Cherriots employees favorably. So all in all, both your Lyft services and your regular bus services really are doing exceptionally well with very little dissatisfaction. And that's part of the piece, is that you may only hear sometimes from the people who aren't happy, but when you do a survey like this and you see what a good job you're doing from most of your customers' perspective, that's really something to be proud of. So anyway, you didn't just do the survey to hear how awesome you are. So one of the things we wanted to do is take a look at what some of the things are most important. And from my perspective, really you have your resources aligned where your customers expect them to be. So there's no major problems here, but sometimes it's important to understand, well, of all the factors that were assessed, what things should we keep emphasizing? And you can see making sure your buses run on time, that they're clean, and people feel safe are really the top 3 things I'd recommend you continue to do. You're rating well now, But sometimes if you take your eyes off the ball, you can end up seeing these ratings drop rather quickly by not continuing to emphasize them. One of the tools that we use to try to identify opportunities of improvement is this matrix. What it shows from left to right is the overall importance of each item, and from the bottom to top shows the overall satisfaction. And at the axis, that's the average of all these items. And most of your items are in what I call the circle of equilibrium. That essentially means you have your resources pretty much aligned where they should be. You know, overall, you don't have anything really outside that circle. The only thing that's outside that circle is actually rated above average, which is good, and that's your buses running on time. And so again, continuing to emphasize that moving forward will be important to sustaining high customer satisfaction ratings in the future. The items that are in the bottom right, your bus cleanliness, personal security, hours of operation, and frequency of service, no real concerns at this point in time, but those are items that are significantly more important on average, and they're also rated somewhat lower now compared to some of the other areas. So keep your eyes on those moving forward to ensure you continue to get these high ratings in the future. So as far as the overall Net Promoter Score, if you're not familiar with this was developed really for Fortune 500 companies back in the early 2000s as a way of kind of giving an assess for if we had people who were our customers, would they advocate for us and help us get more customers? And while we do this and provide this score, it sometimes doesn't make as much sense for transit services as it does perhaps for McDonald's competing against Kentucky Fried Chicken and Taco Bell, and a lot of people have choices. Sometimes people using transit don't have a choice. And so oftentimes we see this rating be very, very low. In other words, the way it's developed is we look at people who are called promoters. Those people give a rating of a 9 or 10 on a 0 to 10 point scale. The detractors are those who are really not positive, not necessarily negative, but they're in the middle, or they go to 0, which actually is negative. And nationally, you actually see that the national average there is very low. It's actually negative at negative 21. And you'll notice that your rating is actually significantly above that at 64% are your promoters, which is the number up here to the right where you see the 9s and 10s. When you subtract the 9% detractors, that gives you this incredible rating that you see here below of 55. So compared to the national average, you're 76 points above the national average, which is totally very rare I would ever see something like this, because it's very rare you would have this many of your customers gives you 9s and 10s. But it really shows perhaps why the community as a whole, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, really values what you do. So anyway, this is to be really commended. Similar story for your Lyft services. 76% of Lyft customers gave ratings of 9 or 10. We don't have a national comparison on paratransit, but you can see your Net Promoter Score is 66, when typically these ratings are much, much lower than that. So again, congratulations on your performance, both on your Lyft service, your bus service. These are truly some incredible ratings. And I know you'll probably get right back to focusing on the problems, which is why you're such a good organization. But I want you to at least take 2 minutes to celebrate what you've accomplished. Before I finish up, though, I want to share some of the community value surveys. Now, the community value survey is a little different because it's a random sample of the community at large. In other words, what we do is called address-based sampling. We selected about 2,500 households, residential households in the region, to be eligible for the survey. We then mailed them surveys and postcards, did follow up with text, email, and even social media advertising to encourage participation. And then we targeted groups to make sure that we had a good representation relative to the census estimates with regard to things like age, ethnicity, gender, and other factors. So our goal was to get 400 completed surveys. We actually ended up with 428. So it's not perfect, but it has results within about plus or minus. It says 4.9, but we'll just say 5% with a 95% level of confidence. And that just means if we did the survey 100 times, 95 times out of 100, we get the same results I'm going to show you today within about plus or minus 5%. So some of the things that we found from the community value were, number one, your brand recognition is incredible. 98% of folks are familiar with your service. In most transit systems, it's about 90%. So most people typically are aware of it depending on where they live, but 98% is among the very best that I've seen. When we ask people whether or not they've used Salem, the Chariot system in Salem, and how often they use it, you can see about 3% said 5 times a week. So those are your folks who we really surveyed on the bus survey. You'll see 69% of the people either haven't used it or don't use it anymore. And the reason that's important is I'm going to share with you what people who stopped using it or have never used it think. They're actually the majority of the respondents to the survey. So 7 out of 10 of the respondents that you see or that responded to the survey really aren't currently engaged with your services, but they still have very positive perceptions. So for those who had stopped using Chariot services, the number one concern was it just takes too long compared to their other options. Some didn't feel safe, but if you work your way down, you'll see 27% said other, and the main reason that they stopped riding is frankly they were able to get a car or they just didn't need it anymore. But so we wanted to understand a little reason for this group here, that 31% who used to use it but since stopped using it. When we look at some of the results of the survey, we asked people whether or not they thought Cherriots is a valuable part of the community, and you'll notice that 85% actually agreed with that. 67% is what we see nationally. So most people in most communities around the country tend to think that their transit service does provide a valuable service, but it's rarely this high at 85%. And the other piece that really stood out to me is the percentage of people who reported it being valuable to them personally, 49% compared to 30% nationally. And you have to remember that 69% of people aren't currently using your service. So they must see benefits, whether it's to their family, to their employees, or others, that somehow has a positive impact to them. Some of the other things that we looked at is whether or not Cherriots provides transportation options to meet people with special needs. As you can see, that was 9% above the national average. And then the perception that you provide affordable transportation options, that's the only area you technically rate below the national average, but you're pretty much right on target. And in some ways, that may be because that's not the primary reason that people are seeing value in the services that you provide. Where people are really seeing value has to do with job opportunities in the region. And that's why I mentioned earlier about the economic benefits. You'll see 78% of the people surveyed in the Salem area think Cherriots helps provide job opportunities compared to just 51% nationally. In addition, people see some great value to what you provide regarding quality of life in the community at 74% compared to 56% nationally. So I think those are some real strong findings that go above and beyond just providing social services or transportation for people who may not have incomes that can afford transportation options. Some of the other things that we learned is people in the community generally think you help reduce pollution and help the environment, positive perceptions related to traffic congestion, and also generally the perception that Cherriots does make roads safer for all users. You can see all of those rated above the national average as well. In addition, so that people generally have a positive view of helping people get to medical facilities, to schools, again, getting to jobs, and also parks and entertainment. All of those areas rated better than we see nationally. We don't have any comparative data for these last few items, but as far as supporting community businesses, providing access to the region or adjacent cities, both of those items are above 60%. You can see providing opportunities for locating people near affordable housing was a little bit lower, and just overall general perception of managing free resources well, that's 40%. Remember, these are the positives. Most people I am not showing are the neutral or people who just didn't know. So that's actually not, we don't have a comparison nationally, but it's actually not necessarily a negative. It's just that people aren't as well informed. When we went through all the things that the community assessed, top 4 things that people rated overall with the highest ratings had to do with your options to provide people mobility who have special mobility needs, getting people to medical facilities, to schools, and getting jobs. You can see all of those rated above 80%. And when we put this together, we asked people whether or not what they thought the most important factors were. You can see that job issue is at the top of the issue. In other words, of the things that you provide, it was the most important thing to the community. Providing affordable transportation options was second, and making sure the transportation options for people with special mobility needs was third. But again, the job issue rated well, but it was also the top priority overall. And the reason we asked some of these questions to the community who aren't necessarily your customers is to help you understand how to interact with them. And this is a similar chart to what I provided before. And I know I'm going through some of these things fairly quickly, but the same thing is you see each of these items that are listed on the far right. As you go from left to right, that shows the relative importance of the item. As you go from the bottom to the top, that's the overall agreement or satisfaction with the item. And you can see most of them are in that central, what I call the equilibrium area. In other words, you have your resources allocated where they really should be. But what you want to do here when you're looking at this and interacting with the community is how do you use this information to perhaps communicate or emphasize things to the community? And what this says is that you should emphasize your role in getting people to jobs, finding affordable transportation options, and what you do to help people with special mobility needs get around. Those are three things that really resonate with the community. So the more you talk about that, the better the community is going to look upon Cherriots. The things that are at the bottom right are issues that you might hear. They're lower, you see, relative importance, but they're also the areas that you get slightly lower ratings on. Of all the areas rated, they have the least positive ratings. And this means that you need to be prepared that this is where you may hear from some distractors. They may complain about how you manage your financial resources. You can see K, or you may hear that you're not doing enough to help people get affordable housing options. And so again, this information can help you prepare for how you interact with different groups in the community based on how they perceive your performance and what they think is important with regard to what you provide. Last couple of things we shared from the community survey were just what features and amenities they thought could even provide more value. And you can see more frequent service, more services to place that people want to go, and additional shelters, at transit stops. And those top two, frequency of service and more routes, are typically the top areas. Shelters at transit stops is a little higher comparatively than I've seen in some other systems, but all in all, no real surprises there to me. And this last piece I'll share with you is the Net Promoter Score. And if you first look at this, you're probably thinking, oh, this is awful. We have a Net Promoter Score of -4. But you got to remember, 69% of the people who respond to the survey aren't even currently riding your service, so it's unlikely they would actively promote or give a 9 or a 10 to their friends and relatives to use it. What you'll notice here is that nationally, though, the Net Promoter Score is -62. For Cherriots, it's just -4. So you see you're 58% above the national average. And you see there's a lot of promoters. 37% of the people in the community are promoters compared to just 11% in most communities. So even though the number may be low, comparatively, you're doing a tremendous job in understanding what the promoters mean. It's just not typically something we would see in a survey like this, to have the community. You're just not going to have a lot of people give 9s and 10s to recommend it when most of them don't even use the service. So with all of that, coming back to the things I shared up front, is lots of great information here. Hopefully you'll take the time to enjoy it, but I know that when you're a high-performing organization like Cherriots, you're going to keep moving forward on the issues that come up. And you can see just overall the value that the community members should actually be 85%, not 89, but those other two, the 98 and 95, are correct. But just tremendous value seen in the community by what Cherriots provides. Being the performance is really the reason I came to present the results today. Been doing this for 30 years, and your results are some of the best that I've ever seen. And we do surveys for hundreds of agencies around the country, including most of the largest agencies in the United States and lots of small ones too. But with that said, use the information, particularly about the importance of issues, to continue serving your customer needs. I think you have your resources and priorities aligned well now, but if you take your eye off the ball, you can see the results drop. So I think making sure you continue to respond to the items that were most important to your customers will help you move forward in the future. And frankly, relish that most folks who are using Cherriots can get to all the places that they need to go. And your current customers, frankly, think you're giving great value, and they would like to see you have even more resources to provide more services over the next 5 years. So with that, I know I've dumped a ton of information out there, but just congratulations. It's a pleasure to be able to present results that are this good to an agency that's performing as well as yours. So with that, I'll stop, but I forgot, we are creating a dashboard. Should have included this for you. So for those of you who love to mine data yourself, this will be ready soon, and we'll actually have all this data online. You can basically run your own queries and see how people responded what different groups, people on different routes think about different issues. And so that's going to be available in the next couple weeks. So with that, I think I'll pause and stop. But anyway, thanks for letting me present today.
Mr. Tatum, thank you so very much. As you mentioned, that was a lot of information, but it was a lot of incredibly valuable information to us. Now I'll see if other board members have questions for you. Director Carney.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. I'm curious, and I perhaps should know this, or maybe we all should, but looking at the community value survey and seeing that your sample goal, or N size, right, is 400, and we got 428, and it says the results were monitored to maintain demographic distribution in proportion to the region. And I just don't know that I am holding in my head the demographic proportions of my region.
Sure.
Can you help with that?
Probably a simpler way to say it is when we're doing our follow-up surveys, we target it to folks who are non-responsive. So in other words, if we don't do any follow-up, 50% of the respondents will probably be over 65 years old, and 2 out of 3 will be women. And so what we're doing is when we do our follow-up, we take a look at what the demographics of the respondent pool should be, and we increase our follow-up to make sure that if Hispanics aren't responding at the rate the census says they should be represented, we do more follow-up with Hispanics. If we have too many women responding compared to men or other groups, we will end up doing more follow-up with that category. So that way, when we're all finished, if you actually look at the demographics of the community survey, it's pretty close to the recent census estimates for the Salem area.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I think I failed to ask my question correctly. What is the demographic distribution of our region? Do we have those
Sure.
numbers? Like I'm thinking
do.
like what percent am I, right? Like how many white women do we have? How many Spanish speaking people do we, what is our average household income? I don't have those off the top of my head, and I don't know that you do either.
Sure.
But I'd be just kind of interested to know.
It's available on census.gov. It's actually a website the U.S. Government Census Bureau operates. You can just type in Salem population census.gov. It'll probably take you right there, and you can take a look at it.
Thank you. Yep.
Other questions? Director Navarro.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. So the question that I have is kind of similar to Director Carney's question. I wanted to know, but specifically trying to figure out how many people responded in Spanish. So how many people got a call in Spanish, talked to somebody in Spanish, and responded in Spanish?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers with me. We can look those up for you.
Okay.
But we did have the survey available online in English and Spanish. And I do know that the Hispanic percentage of respondents was similar to the census estimate. But if that's something you're interested in, we can certainly track that down for you. It's a statistic we would track. I just don't have it with me.
Yes, please. Thank you.
While others are maybe mulling questions, I'm interested in the community, both the Net Promoter Score, but then also the question around whether or not we provide a community value. And so if I'm remembering correctly, 85% of the community indicated that we do provide value to the community. However, our Net Promoter Score, as you noted, was -4%. And so unless I'm mistaken, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect in those findings. And is it that, oh, I love it as a value to the community of which I do not, see myself a part of, like the other uses these services, I do not, and therefore I don't recommend it? Like, could you help me interpret some of this data?
Yeah, I use the Net Promoter Score because I know in the industry it's widely used. However, in this situation, when we're asking the community at large how likely they would be to recommend Cherriots services to their friends and relatives, and 69% of the people don't use it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they don't think it provides value to the community. It's just that they're not going to recommend it because they don't even necessarily know how to use it. They're not using it themselves. And so the way the Net Promoter Score works is it only focuses on the 9s and 10s, or your promoters, anybody who gives a 6, 5, 4, 3, those numbers don't count as promoters. But oftentimes people do think there's value in a service even if they don't use it. And so there are really two different indicators. One is, do I think Cherriots provides value? Absolutely. I may not use it myself, but I see there's great value in the community for it. In your net promoter scores, how likely is the average person in the community to recommend using Chariot service to other people? But when you have most of the respondents not using it, they're not likely to make those recommendations. I hope that makes sense. They're really two different indicators.
No, it does. Thank you for threading that needle for me. Any other questions? Okay. Mr. Tatum, thank you. Oh, please. Director Duncan.
I almost didn't ask because I don't think you have this number, but it's something that I'm curious about and I'd like to pose it. We have a small portion of our population that actively rides, and that's reflected here. There's a rather large percentage of the population that said that they used to ride. So I guess my curiosity is, like, who has used our service within a certain time frame, like the last 5 years, the last 3 years? And I know that it may not be that pertinent, but at least for me, at least understanding like maybe a larger view, like moving out of, we clearly have community members that are using the service for a specific portion of their life when they're experiencing certain circumstances, and then kind of from their perspective, since they said they're driving a car, like graduating out of it. And I think it would be really interesting to kind of get an idea of what percentage of the community as a whole has been reliant on Chariot services at some point in time. And that may not be something for us, but I just wanted to highlight it to the rest of the group, maybe to think about in the future, because especially as we go and talk to other entities about getting funding and resources and things, kind of highlighting that a large portion of the community has been reliant on Chariot services or has been touched by Chariot services might be advantageous. It might make that number of how many people are actively using it feel a little bigger in the long term. So it was just kind of a thought I had. Like I said, I'm not sure if this is consequential for you, but thank you for the presentation, and this data is fabulous.
Seeing no other questions, Mr. Tatum, thank you very much. If I heard correctly, you're from Kansas City, in which case, congrats on the Super Bowl win. You're welcome.
Anyway, we'll follow up. I'll track down the numbers of Spanish completed surveys for you, and we'll get that to your staff. But otherwise, thanks for giving me this chance to present.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
So we're not done with this section. So what you heard tonight was the results of Wave 3. Mm-hmm. We wanted to show you, the historic trends of all 3 waves and what it shows. So I'll turn it over to Chief Feeney to present that. And you have a copy of it in your slides.
Good evening again, Vice President Davidson and board members. Thank you, Kira Pressey, for pulling up my slide. I only have the one. If you could go to the main one, here we go. Ignore what's in your packet. I had an aha moment when Christopher Tatum was presenting to us yesterday at the ELT. It occurred to me that I can't do an oranges and oranges or apples and apples, whatever you want to call it, comparison, because the methodology on these surveys is so different, and I'll get to that in a minute. But what I've done is I've taken the survey focus question or area. These were some of the ones that were more significant. And Wave 1, which, as you know, established the baseline for us. Wave 2 built on that and confirmed what we knew. But what we were wondering, is this just a one-off, or how do we further validate it? And so it was exciting, and I think very validating to us yesterday when we did get a presentation from ETC that, in fact, we are moving in the right direction. And when Chris reported out that we were 70 some odd points above what is called I want to get it exactly right, the industry sampled average, I was thinking, wait a minute, I thought it was 33. I was thinking of the first 2 waves. So what I've done is I've broken it out. So Wave 1 and Wave 2, the ISA for those 2 surveys was 35 for the first one, 33 for the second. And as a reminder, this is, again, would people recommend riding Cherriots? So what I wanted to point out the difference is that TransPro compared about 24 other transit agencies over 2 years. For ETC, which gives us the average is a negative 21, they drew data over 5 years across 50 states and more than 80 transit agencies. And so we're doing even better than we initially thought we were. And again, I think it's tremendously validating. I remember when my partner in crime, Bobby Kidd, who's our systems initiatives administrator, we got the preliminary results from TransPro. We were pretty shocked. I think we felt Christmas came early, and maybe we even shed a tear. But I just think this is built on this and confirms, again, what our presenter tonight was saying, is that we are going in the right direction, and these are some really good numbers. And if you have any questions.
I've got one. So is it correct to say that the ISA with the one asterisk is, forgive me, they are the Transdashians?
Right, that
Okay.
applies to wave, actually it applies to wave 2. Wave 1's ISA was 35 for the Net Promoter Score.
Oh, but so the first industry standard are the Transdashians, and then the second one, which we just saw presented today, is a larger sample size.
Correct.
Okay, so I don't make it a habit of drawing conclusions, but I suspect that the people who are self-selecting to participate in Transdash are probably keenly interested in these kinds of findings in a way that the larger group perhaps are not. And well, although they participated in a survey, never mind. This is why I don't draw a conclusion. Administrator Kidd.
The industry average for wave 1 and wave 2, it wasn't just Transdash,
Oh.
it's TransPro.
Okay.
So it's their survey services.
Oh, that is helpful.
It's a couple dozen agencies.
Yeah, so I think, because TransPro, in this business is newer, they don't have a sample size big enough compared to ETC, who's been doing it for years. So, over time, the TransPro one would get bigger, but we just wanted to make sure we're showing the trend. And what really showing is, even with two different firms who have two different experiences, generally drew consistent responses for what we're doing. So there's no outlier, there's no surprises. It's been steady all 3 times, which is what we wanted to see.
Other questions? Okay. I'll just, anything else on this? Okay. To maybe just wrap this up in a neat little bow, I do want to highlight a couple things from these surveys. And one is that, as Mr. Tatum mentioned, that this is the kind of data you see from organizations that have made it a habit to focus on customer service. And I think Cherriots has done that extremely well. It's not just the vibes or my hunch. This is now data supported. It has been now several times. But I specifically want to call out our operators and then customer service staff, because they're specifically called out in this data. What they're doing is phenomenal. Please keep it up. And that is, of course, not to say that the other individuals that help those individuals are not important, but here I can rely on not just my vibes, but some data as well. So thank you. Next, we'll proceed to public comment. And we do not have any signed up in-person public comment or virtual. I'll pause for a moment to see if anybody would like to jump up or jump on. Okay. Next, we have the consent calendar. So if there are no issues with it, would someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to move to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the consent calendar? Okay. I'll just say that I really appreciate the compilation of the reportable assault data. I think, as we maybe saw demonstrated here, if we don't track things, tracking things is one way that we demonstrate that we care about things. And so I think it's really important that we're tracking this and that we as a board are able to see this data. And very exciting to see the Q4 look as good as it did. Okay, no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Next up, our first and only action item, the SCATS Policy Committee letter. Director Carney?
You can do it.
All right, thank you, Vice President Davidson. Let me just forward to. Sorry, I gotta find my spot to back up. No.
Actually, click agenda.
Oh,
And then click there.
yeah. All right, so thank you again, Vice President Davidson. We discussed this at our last board meeting as an item, and what we're presenting to the board this evening is a letter that we're proposing to submit to the Salem-Keizer Area Transportation Study Policy Committee for their meeting, which takes place next Tuesday, the 27th of February. They have received a letter from the city of Almsville, and we would like to submit a letter from this board or this governing body to the policy committee in support of a facilitated process to consider a revision to the cooperative agreement, which is the guidance document that the SCATS Policy Committee, or the Salem-Keizer Area Transit Study Policy Committee, follows in making their decisions and adheres to in terms of how the voting structure is created. With the addition of Almsville, the city of Almsville, to our census-designated urbanized area after the 2020 United States Census, there is an opportunity to add an additional member, Almsville, to the policy committee. And I think at the same time, we have the opportunity to take a bigger look at the overall makeup of our policy committee and the voting structure that sort of drives our decision-making process with that group. There are several federal guidance documents that focus on equitable and proportional representation on MPO voting structures and policy committees as a matter of practice. And that's not something we see on our current SCATS policy committee, where the city of Salem, that has 65% of the population, has the same vote as the city of Turner, which has 4% or a small number of people representing. And so it sort of, it shifts the balance in that voting structure to favor smaller jurisdictions and areas with fewer people to represent. And I think our board would be interested in having kind of an open dialogue in reaching a conclusion about what a better voting structure could look like for the SCATS policy committee, if indeed changes are needed. And we think that they could be needed. And the city of Salem agrees that perhaps a shift in the current voting structure could be supported in our decisions moving forward about the cooperative agreement. And so we drafted a letter that is attached, asking the policy committee to consider a facilitated process to guide the discussion with the policy committee, which is a proposal that was made by the SCAT staff at the Mid-Willamette Valley COG that supports our policy committee. And we would like to see the update and modernization of the cooperative agreement and the policy committee bylaws that guide the work of the policy committee, as the cooperative agreement that was written in 1987, I believe, says in the text that it will be updated every 5 years, but to date has only been updated to add the city of Turner as a voting member and has never had any textual revisions to the content of the cooperative agreement. And I think as I don't like necessarily the term public servants, But I think as people serving the public, as representatives of a decision-making body, we are beholden to the guidance documents that we are following. And I think to not have made an update is, an oversight, and in some ways a failure of the group. And so I have encouraged the policy committee to really take that seriously in terms of how we look at the documents that we're using to guide our decisions and the way that those decisions affect our communities. I think it is both timely and appropriate to update our cooperative agreement and the bylaws for the policy committee. And so I am seeking this board's approval to submit the letter that is attached in your packet to the policy committee for presentation at their meeting next Tuesday, February 27th. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Director Laura Mekeith.
Thank you, Vice President. Director Carney, I am, as you well know, very supportive of this. I'm embarrassed to say this, I'm just reading this now for the first time, so forgive me, this might be a little preliminary, but what you just said seems to be not exactly what I'm reading in the letter.
Okay.
Which in the letter, it's a little bit meek and mild to my taste. The letter is basically, as far as I'm reading it, asks for a facilitated process and doesn't really, is kind of agnostic to what you've just outlined. It doesn't really take a position on what the hopes of this board, what that process would translate into in terms of an end result. And I say that because I don't see why we couldn't take a position. Maybe there's a reason we can't that I'm open to hearing. Mm-hmm. So I think it could be a little bit stronger. Mm-hmm. And then I also think that it has a direct impact in the last line, which is it says, I'm amending it now, but it says, update our cooperative agreement, serve the people of the region in the best way possible. As someone who spends most of his day having people yell at him who disagree with him, I often find that when best is presented without qualification, most equitable, most representative, it tends to turn people off pretty quickly, because your best is not my best, isn't whomever else's best. And so I just wonder if qualifying what best means and maybe being a little bit more specific and material in terms of our actual goals and beyond the facilitator process might make this a stronger letter.
Thank you, Director Laura Meadcave. I think that's a great observation and certainly one that we can take into consideration. I'm happy to hear comments of others who've been involved or those who haven't.
Director Navarro, please.
Yeah, thank you, Vice President Davidson. I think that I appreciate the comments. I really like the letter. And so I think being kind of just direct about what we're supporting here, which is a review from an outside entity to be able to see if this is something that is going to be done, that needs to be done, because it might not need to be done. And I think us just being supportive of that is a better position to take than to take a hard position to say this is what we're asking and this is what we want done.
Director Duncan.
So I was trying to pull up the language of the letter again for myself, and I wasn't able to real quick. But I will, at least from my perspective, give a little bit of context. As somebody who's kind of just been the listening party in on a lot of these conversations, this is really delicate. We have kind of a complicated situation going on where we have certain members of this body that are going to feel as if they are getting lesser of the deal if City of Salem potentially has more of an equitable representation, meaning that although City of Salem represents more individuals and more miles of road, there are people that are concerned that if they were to have a more equitable structure, that their jurisdictions will be left out. And so right now the conversation is a bit dicey because people are they're concerned and they're defensive. And I think that, everybody is doing the best to look out for their communities, which makes a lot of sense here. And we're in a very specifically unique situation where we represent across lines with almost every single one of the people that we're talking to. And so we represent more communities than anybody else. So kind of holding those things together, I think that at this point in time, having a letter that is just calling for this facilitated process it's a bit more political. It'll be a little bit less aggressive than coming out and saying exactly, this is what we think it should be. We're really asking for a third party because we are understanding how valuable this discussion is and how much people are going to be impassioned about it and potentially defensive on it. I think it's also important to remember that as we go through this process of representation, I think that something that gets lost in the mix here is the way that we vote on this committee is a bit different than other places. There's some concern that if City of Salem were to have more people on the board, they would somehow take the majority. This is a board where if a single entity decides to vote no, the whole thing stops. So any of these smaller communities could choose at any point in time to halt and, encourage further discussion. The reason why the equitability is important is because our city council member is representing like 5 or 6 times as many individuals and miles of road than their counterparts. And that is easily mixed up when it comes to talking to the community about this issue, because there are very few boards that I've ever heard of that operate in such a way where one entity could stop a vote. We vote by unanimous, we have to be unanimous in order to move forward with anything. So for these reasons of it being complicated and delicate, I think it makes sense at this point to be a little bit more tempered in our response. And we're really asking for, in a lot of ways, legal light here on this as well, because there are federal guidelines that really should be investigated at a higher level. And we can do all the looking that we need, but at the end of the day, we want professional help in doing so. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on it. It's complicated and delicate, and at the end of the day, we are highly invested ourselves in each of these communities, and we want each of these communities to have equitable representation. And I think that it's not necessarily how it's being perceived at this moment. And so I just want us to move forward with grace and caution and goodwill to the community, understanding that we're really doing this because we do have everyone's best interests at heart. We're not trying to attack anybody. And I think that a slightly more tempered response might be what's needed given the delicacy. And I think that's all.
Thank you. Director Holmstrom.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. I appreciate all the conversation by the members of the board, and I'm sympathetic to Director Lara McKiff's point of view, frankly, personally. I think some changes are necessary. That being said, I think the letter that we've drafted is what's maybe necessary at this point in time. It really does. One thing I like that it does is that it recognizes, it acknowledges that this is not going to be easy, and that there are differences of opinion on this, and that we know that. So I do like that. I know that it's not going to be an easy conversation. I appreciate the proposed approach of bringing in a third party to facilitate those discussions, because they haven't got very far so far without that third party. So I like the letter, I support it, and I look forward to further discussions about this topic and maybe moving further if necessary in the future. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, I'd just like to maybe amend and elaborate my comments in 4 ways. The first is, while I'm very supportive of our efforts here, I'm also very sympathetic to our rural community. I grew up in Shaw and Staten, and most of my family that lives in Oregon lives in rural Marion County, and so boy do I know that we get the short end of the stick on almost everything. And so I understand that. I wouldn't even want to appear to be suggesting otherwise. Second, in my feedback on the letter, I was not suggesting to not have a facilitated process. I believe strongly in that. And third, my comment around, let's see if I can get through 4 without losing my train of thought. My third, it was about just coming out and saying it. And the spirit of that feedback was just that we've all been saying it. It almost feels a little, not to be too on the nose, almost feels a little disingenuous not to say what our hopes are, because you just finished, very articulately describing what our intentions are. I think all of us share those intentions, and I think it would be, it's not the hill I'm going to die on, but it would be odd not to at least name that. And if I were someone reading the letter, I might go, well, we all, okay, facility process, we all know what Cherriots want. And so, but that's neither here nor there per se. And fourth, I'll just finish by saying I still stand by amending the best line.
Please.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. Perhaps it would be prudent to include in our letter reference to the motion that this board passed, and forgive me, I don't remember the month, where we unanimously supported a facilitated process with the aim of achieving a more equitable and representative voting process as the intended outcome.
I love that.
I have some thoughts, a question. So I agree with the word best and the ambiguity and uncertainty there, but does that not also extend to equitable? I think other letters that we've seen demonstrate that. And so I'm afraid that if we inject language like that, that for many is not defined the same way, we're not furthering our cause and perhaps only distracting from the immediate need, which right now is a facilitated process. My, conception of what the SCATS policy committee should look like, I can almost guarantee will look different than what Director Carney thinks. And I imagine that will replicate a few times over. And I think having a third party come in right from the get-go, I'm willing to say that my perspective will change through that process. I imagine those of us who are actually on the policy committee, both representing Cherriots and others, may as well. So I get the intent. There's that tension there where I'm afraid if we, I fully support changing the last sentence. I don't know if referencing the previously approved language gets us to where we want to go. Director Duncan.
I just want to note you bringing up equitable is prudent because within this committee we have struggled to define equity and equality differently and accurately. So I just wanted to, that might need to be spelled out just for clarity, since for some reason there's some contention around the difference between the two. So yeah.
And I don't know if I am ready to have a definition session right now on like what we think as equity. I think our time might be better served elsewhere right now, but please.
If I may add a few things. So I think we need to go back to what the original ask was from the staff recommendation, was to bring in a facilitator. I think if we get over prescriptive, we're presupposing we know what we want, and part of the facilitated discussion may bring up other opportunities that we may think is better than what we are thinking right now. And ultimately, we can bring those array of options back to chew on and give guidance to our representative for when it comes time to decision making. Because it's also more than just what the representation look like. We're asking to update and modernize the whole document, which has different meanings for different things. So I think ultimately it's the basic ask is we need a facilitator to go through all this and then bring back things as they're developed. Because there may be a better solution than one vote, one entity, one vote, or weighted. There may be a third or fourth option, and we don't want to put in the letter, this is what we want, and then, we changed our mind again.
And I mean, I think the reality is that we can submit many of these letters moving forward as we get more information through a facilitated process. This is not our one and only shot at this. I also just want to flag as maybe an anecdote that I think, if I'm doing my math right, a majority of this board wasn't even born when the original cooperative agreement was signed. And if the only change, I didn't mean to shame anyone.
He said no.
Yeah, I didn't say who.
I was not born yet.
The point I'm trying to make is that if the only change has been the addition of a new government to the policy committee, I think it's the addition of Almsville to the geographic boundaries is a wonderful opportunity to reconsider this. And I'm excited by the opportunity. I think these entities as cooperative functions of government, collaborative governance, are fascinating. They can be very productive. And I think the most important thing that they can do is regularly do tune-ups. And this is a great opportunity to do that. So, but any other, Director Duncan?
I just wanted to strengthen what what you just said. Specifically, sorry, I struggle with the formalities constantly, and that's why I often just say you or you when we're doing these. But I wanted to say that I just wanted to piggyback on what you had to say, because I fully agree that I think there's something about that strengthens our argument in a way of being a little bit more aloof and to the side, because we're presenting something that's incredibly logical and nonpartisan by just simply asking for the facilitated process at this time and refraining from putting in what, I mean, like you said, many of us have already differing opinions. And a lot of some of the other letters that we've seen come in are a little bit more on the nose. And I think just simply asking for more information is a very intellectual standpoint, and I appreciate it. So thank you for voicing it in that way.
Please.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. I would just say I really appreciate the thoughtful comments of this board and your attention to this. I do think it is a great opportunity, and I especially appreciate the comments around a facilitated process potentially bringing to light solutions that we haven't considered. As it relates to what is in the cooperative agreement, as it relates to what is in the bylaws, and I think, and I hope very much that we can have a very productive and fruitful and collaborative conversation with this group moving forward. And I think that has so far been lacking in the way the conversations have been directed and led. And you know, I'm very optimistic that a facilitated conversation could lead to something that really does have benefits for all of the communities involved, our riders and Almsville and Turner and Marion County and Salem and Kaiser. I think it is good government to do housekeeping and updates on documents like this. And I'm appreciative of this board and leadership at this district for the consistent upkeep that we do. And so, yeah, I'm happy to take direction and propose changes to the letter that is written, but I would also be happy to see it proceed as written. So I'll turn it back to you, Vice President Davidson.
Director Laura Meadkeefe, do you want to suggest a different word than best, or what's your preference moving forward?
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. I'm less queasy about equitable, but given the context that Director Duncan has provided, I think I take that. And if we want best, and that's best, then so be it. But dare I suggest just ending it with, so that we can serve the people of the region.
That is very elegant, if I may say so. Okay. So, would you like to make a motion to that effect?
I'm going to make this up as I go, but I move that the board adopt this letter with the following changes, which is that the last line be amended to end with, so we can serve the people of the region.
Okay. And could you also throw in authorize President Pressey to sign, or Hinojosa Pressey to sign?
And to authorize President Hinojosa Pressey to sign the letter.
Perfect.
I second.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? We've had a fair amount. It was healthy. It was great.
I want to say that this is 8 years older than I am, I believe, if I've done the math correct. I'm very excited then, and I want to also be thankful to all of my colleagues, that even with our differing opinions, have had a very thorough conversation about this, and we were able to, and I just love working with you guys, and I just really appreciate that we were all able to bring our differences here. And I say that not to make people feel old, but to make this document feel old. I am a fully grown adult, okay? So anyway, thank you very much.
I don't want to you. It's 13 years older than me.
Wow.
Director Holmstrom, would you like to chime in?
I think I was like in 4th grade. Yeah, when this was
Okay, we do have a motion and a second on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Next, we have a few informational reports, the first of which is an update to our strategic plan.
And I'll ask Strategic Initiatives Administrator Kidd to please come forward and present the report.
Good evening, good evening, everyone. Just want to make sure this works. There we go. All right. I am thrilled to be presenting this evening because we just had an opportunity to hear the results of the Community Value Survey and the Customer Satisfaction Survey. And some of those results will play a part in the report this evening, which is on quarter 2 of fiscal year 24 strategic plan report. So let's start with the guiding principles. I begin every presentation with this because this is truly the foundation, the guiding light of the agency and how we want to show up every day in the actions, in our actions and what we say. I want to highlight a couple of the values. I mentioned last quarter that one of the initiatives at the division level was to embed the values in our everyday. And one of those ways is during the general manager roundtable once a month. Last year, people were identifying what the values meant to them and how they show up. And then in this fiscal year, what is happening is people are sharing how the values are being exemplified in others around them at work. And so communication and excellence has been highlighted by employees for other employees during the general manager roundtable, and has just had a really positive effect in how we see the values live out. So this is our success outcome for our 4 buckets, how we measure success, which is the community, customer, culture of ownership, so those are the employees, and the financial sustainability piece. So from the results that we heard earlier, we were able to update our success outcome grid, which is our baseline going into our community value, was 87, and our goal was to increase by 3. Well, we have our score back, which is 85. So although it has gone down by 2 points, it is exceptionally high and something we should be really proud of. And that's the percentage of the community who sees value in the agency. And so moving on to customer satisfaction, our net promoter score is how we measure this, and one of the ways we measure this. And so for fixed route, our goal was not to go lower than 52, and for our lift was not to go lower than 51. So we have our NPS for local, which is 55, and for paratransit, our lift, just hot off the press, I didn't even have a chance to update this, was 66. So they have both increased. We exceeded our expectations on this success outcome. For culture of ownership, I'm going to be talking about this a little bit later, but we are currently working on the employee engagement survey that will be conducted this spring. So we don't have the results yet, but we will by the end of this fiscal year. And then for financial sustainability for year 2, which is where we're at currently, we're focusing in on a 3-year rolling budget forecast. Okay, so I'm going to do a high-level overview of our organizational tactics. We have 13, and of those 13, you can see where each of them fall within the community value, customer, employee, and financial sustainability. So those are the titles of the 13 organizational tactics. And here is a beautiful dashboard created by Kira Pressey. I'll do a shout out for her. She has really helped with the organization and display of the organizational and divisional tactics. So you're seeing a snapshot of our dashboard here. So the top left are the 22 division tactics divided by each division. On average, there's about 3, give or take, 1. And then on the top right is a comparison between the organizational tactics and the division tactics, the percentage assigned to either. And then the bottom left highlights that we have 13 organizational tactics, which is the main purpose of this evening's presentation. And on the bottom right, that's a really great Q2 tactic status. I am sharing that there are, on the division side, 14 on-track divisional tactics. There are 4 behind schedule. There is 3 complete. Now this is Q2 work, so it doesn't mean that the tactic, the activity is complete, it's the work within quarter 2 is complete. And then 1 not started. And on the bottom right, the very bottom right, is the organizational tactics. So 7 on track, 4 behind schedule for Q2, 2 complete, and 0 not started. And then there are various reasons for the 4 behind schedule, one of them being a changeover in procurement staff, and then just various other reasons that in Q3 should be on track now. And those were identified in the reports and in the meetings. All right, so the organizational tactic highlight, I like to highlight a few each quarter about the work that's being done. The first one being around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a new series of listening sessions were launched in Q2 during the in-service training, and the topic was unconscious bias. There was work completed with Shemeketa in the development of an on-site training, and there was an on-site training for the senior leadership team. One of the things discussed was how to build an effective DEI committee, which is forthcoming. And of course, there's a lot of work being done in the board subcommittee around DEI, so much thanks. For the second organizational tactic I'd like to highlight is the community value survey, and I'm going to add the customer satisfaction survey in there as well, and I think you might guess the reason why. It was because during Q2, the surveys were implemented and conducted, and we received over 400 community value surveys that were completed, and you were able to hear the results earlier this evening. The very exciting results, if I may add. And then finally, the finance story. So there's a presentation and strategy developed that includes a compelling narrative and highlights benefits of a well-funded public transit system. It uses personal stories and visuals to convey the story. And also the 11-year consecutive GFOA recognition was included in the Neighborhood Association monthly information. So slowly but surely getting that financial story out there to make sure that people see. Okay. So let's look ahead, and one of the first things we're going to do in looking ahead is I'm going to bring us to our TransDash dashboard, and I'm going to show you a different avenue of accessing the dashboard beyond our website. So I'm going to move over to the computer, just a moment. I would like to remind everyone that you can access the TransDash dashboard on the Cherriots website. But I wanted to point out another avenue of accessing the TransDash dashboard through the TransPro/TransDash website. So if you Google TransPro TransDash, it's going to bring you to the following screen. And in the top right-hand corner, you're going to click the TransDash icon. And I'm going to move this really quickly. And then in the top right, you're going to see agency dashboards. And the reason why I wanted to point this out is because not only do you have access to the Cherriots, but you also have access to other TransDash members or TransDashians. So I will go to the Cherriots Salem, Oregon TransDash dashboard. You'll see the welcome video from General Manager Pollock. You can scroll down. And these are the 4 metrics that are highlighted at the front at all times. And then I would like to point out too, at the bottom of the screen, the flashing transit news or the Cherriots news, those are updated quarterly, so dependent upon what we're updating with our metrics. So you'll notice a refreshed community value percentage, a fresh customer satisfaction net promoter score. You'll see our culture of ownership is the same from last spring, but that will be updated shortly. And then the financial sustainability as it stands right now, but that was not updated this quarter. And then, so I would encourage everyone to go through and look at some other agency dashboards. And then also too, you can get into the nitty gritty on this data by going into the data exploration. And there's even more data that I could spend a long time discussing, but I will let you take a look at it. And of course, if you have any questions, you can ask. So I'm going to go back to the front just a second. Before I move on to my last slide, I would like to say that TransDash is going to be visiting us either virtually or in person. I'm not quite sure yet, within the next 3 board meetings. So by the end of the summer, hopefully, or by the beginning of the summer, we'll have TransDash be able to come and be able to go in even deeper information about TransDash, and we can make sure we ask them, or you can ask them any questions at that point too. Okay, so we're actually currently in quarter 3, so lots happening. The employee engagement survey prep I mentioned earlier, we are definitely in that working. The HR team is working on communication, and that's going to be implemented beginning of April, probably April 1st. And then we'll get the data to you after that. Then also, fiscal year 25 here is in a few months, and so we are finishing strategic planning around the fiscal year 25 and planning for those organizational tactics that are exactly based upon the surveys and the current work being done. And then we're finalizing the strategic plan dashboard that I mentioned earlier that I showed you a screenshot. We're working on that. And then finally, another thing about TransDash is the national quarterly results is in March. And that's where all of the TransDash agencies get together, and we're able to share our quarterly updates. And it's going to reflect our new community and customer survey results. All right, I would love to take any questions if you have them. Thank you so much for having me.
Questions? All right, no questions.
Easy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is our performance report.
Okay, I'll ask Chief of Zoom to please come forward.
Good evening. Thank you, Vice President Davidson and other directors. Can we pull up the presentation? Yes. All right. I am happy to be here to report our FY24 Q2 performance report for Cherriots. Starting with some high-level events that happened in the Q2. Beginning in October of 2023, we started the construction of charging station at Del Webb facilities. And in November, we have completed the surveys for the coordinated plan for the Cherriots. In December, we have executed the contract for our ITS provider, which is Avail Technology. So those are all great milestones for those 3 months. And this is our system-wide performance report, including all modes, fixed routes, paratransit, dial-a-ride, and van pool. We have seen about 19.3% ridership increase compared to the last year, same fiscal year 23 of Q2. And we have, in this same time period, the revenue hours have increased 9.3%. What does that mean? Is basically at the time, in the Q2 of FY23, we were 93% of pre-COVID. Right now, we're 100% of the pre-COVID service level. And there's a big milestone, I would say, we achieved in the calendar year of 2023. It's the first time since pre-COVID of 2019 ridership we have surpassed 3 million ridership in the system-wide. Yeah, so, and again, so it's still local service, local fixed route service, that's still the backbone. We are getting 92% of the total ridership. And paratransit service Lyft in Benpool, it's, yeah, about 25,000, 24,000 and 19,000 correspondingly. Some breakdown of those ridership information, starting with the fixed route boardings. And compared to the FY23 Q1 and FY24 Q2 and FY24 Q2, we have seen significant ridership increase in the local service, which is about 19.8% increase, and in the regional service, total ridership is low, but overall percent increase is significantly higher, which is 31.5%. The boarding per revenue mile for the local services slightly increased from 1.1 to 1.3, and the regional routes remain same. And this is the breakdown of quarterly increase or decrease in terms of total boardings. We're going to take a look at weekday versus weekends, how that has changed. Total boarding wise, I have already mentioned 19.8% increase compared to the fiscal year 23 Q2, and for the locals and for the regionals, 31.5%. If we look at the weekday versus weekend service, it's pretty consistent since most of those ridership came from the local service, so it's pretty much aligned with 19.8%, about 20.5% increase in the weekdays. And in the weekend service, in the left side of the graph, we see just 4.6% increase in the local and a significant increase in the regional routes, about 31%. Please note the total ridership is low, so 31% increase may not have, like, total number of riders may not be that high. It's just a percentage. And on the Sundays, the average boarding increase about 37%. And this is the standards that we have for different kind of routes. We have corridor routes, which is target is to achieve 20 routes per revenue hour, and we have coverage routes, 10 rides per revenue hours, and same target for commuter express and regional express routes. And we have 5 rides per revenue hour target for the deviated fixed route. Let's take a look at this productivity chart for the weekdays and for the corridor routes. For the Route 19, it hits the target of 20 boardings per revenue hour. And overall, compared to the Q1 of FY24, we have seen slight increase across the board pretty much for most of those routes, which is promising. And you know that October is the highest ridership month, so with the good weather and everything contributes to that, pretty much we have seen slight increase across the board. Likewise for 21 and 11, we have seen slight increase compared to the Q1 of FY24. The next one is on the weekday local bus services, and this is really good to see some new routes that have exceeded the target. So in the FY24 Q1, we only had Route 16 that exceeded the goal of 10 boardings per revenue hours. In the Q2, we have seen some good news. Route 23 and Route 7 that have exceeded the targets of 10 boardings per revenue hours, so which is promising and good stories. And yep. So, and also for the Route 14, it was in Q1 8.8, so it's right now 9.7. Across the board, we have seen some progress, slight increase pretty much for most of those routes. And the Saturdays, same story. We have seen Route 21, 19, and 3. Those were also in the Q1 of FY24. Those exceeded the target, so that remained constant. And we have seen some other routes have some increase to some degrees across the board for all of those routes on Saturdays. On Sunday, we have limited service in there, and like Q1, we have Route 16 that had exceeded the target of 10 boardings per revenue hours, and Route 7 and 6 remained pretty consistent compared to the Q1 of FY24. And the weekday rides for the regional services, that remains, we have seen, again, slight increase, but we're still yet to achieve the target of 10 boardings per revenue hours. So with 40X being the highest ridership and highly productive among those regional routes, and following by route 10X and 1X. On Saturdays, for the regional routes, we have 40X still consistently relatively higher productive routes among those regional routes. In the Q1, it was 6 boardings per revenue hour. It's 6.9. So we've seen slight increase, pretty much same story, but for both local and regional across the board from the Q1 to Q2. And this is the local service for all routes on Sunday. And so in this case, we have one new route, which is Route 5, that have exceeded the goal of 20 boardings per revenue hour compared to the Q1. And Route 21 and 19 also exceeded the same time frame. So the Route 5 is the new one, and overall across the board we have seen slight increase for the rest of the routes. This is a snapshot of Youth Pass Zero Pass program. We have seen continuous success and ridership growth in this program. The total increase of ridership is 37% for the local service and about 51% in the regional service. Just to give you some number of, like in the Q1, the total ridership was 214,000. And in Q2, we have reached close to 250,000 riders, so that's how it's rising. So the total ridership is increasing, but the percent change is going down because the number is getting larger. So we understand the context. And likewise, during the month of October, we had the highest ridership in this Youth Pass from among the youth riders for both local and regional routes. For the holiday service for the Q2, we only had one holiday, Veterans Day, and that was Saturday. And on Saturday, we provide Sunday level service. That's why we have slightly reduced ridership compared to the last year of 4,000 to 3,500. So that's because of the lower service level. Cherriots lift service, and this is something that operates only in the UGB boundary. And in the Q2, FY24 Q2, the on-time performance have increased slightly. In the Q1, it was 87.7%, and now it's about 90%. Which is very promising. And then part of the reason is as we're moving through and as we're having better understanding of the VIA platform from both customer side and our side, we're optimizing the schedule that's helping us to better serve the people where they're going and understanding those origin and destination better. And VIA platform has the ability to customize those, making sure that in that one trip we can cover maximum as many trips as possible. So as we're going through those exercises, as we move on, we're seeing some performance improvement in the on time. So the target is still 91. Hopefully we'll get there soon. And the rides per revenue hour remains constant. So the goal is 2.75. We're just about 2. And the trips denied 0, which is requirement. So if it's anything above 0, that's not a good sign. So we had all those 0 means those are all great things. So no ADA complaints during this period. That's great. And no complaints per 1,000 trips. So that's another big milestone. And percent of rides less than 60 minutes is 100%, because what we have seen, since the service area is pretty small, so most of those riders, the ride average trip length is maybe 15 to 16 minutes. I mean, within 15 minutes, you can go north of south of UGB, so that's why. So 100% of those trips are very short trip. We looked at how many new riders were there in this period, and there was about 142 new riders in this period, so they use our system. And we have also looked at how actually they make the reservation for the service, request the service. About 95% of those, they basically call MTM, our agent, and an agent help them to make the reservation. only 5% of those riders use the mobile app or used our website. So we understand how things are operating. So to put it into perspective. But the good thing is we have seen some increase in ridership from the last year to this year, from 18,000 to about 24,000. Some visuals, I'm not sure you can read it, but, and again, I just want to make sure that everyone understand this, this graph. I had to scale it down really high. Actually, pretty much all across the UGB, we have origin and destination, pickup and drop off. But if I have like 0 to 100, the first range on the scale, then it's going to be messy. It's hard to read the big picture. So the purpose is to make the scale really high so that we can see where majority of the people are going so that we have a better understanding. It doesn't mean we don't have any riders from Kaiser or West Salem. There are plenty of those. It depends on how you scale it up or scale it down. So that's what it means. And the story remains consistent. So majority of the people go to the worksite or residence or dialysis centers, senior centers, and training centers. So, and same for the drop-offs as well. The Shop and Ride, this is a service for the seniors and people with disabilities who don't qualify for Cherriots Lift complimentary paratransit service. They can take this service. It's a dial ride, door-to-door dial ride service, and we have seen slight increase in here from 1,150 to 1,298 in the Q2 for that particular time period. The customer engagement, we have seen a lot of good stuff during the earlier presentation today about how good we're doing in terms of customer engagement, and that reflects here as well. In the FY24 Q2, the total calls received was just above 11,000, and 99.5% of those answered less than 3 minutes. And yeah, the goal achieved for the person answered less than 5 minutes as well. And the lift service and Shop and Ride, the goal is to have less than 3 minutes, but you know, we're serving the special group of people, so who may have questions and better understanding of technology, how things work. So our customer service is doing a really good job explaining things so that they understand and going over things. Some people are technologically they need some explanation, so that's why this number is a little higher, but I think this is the right thing to do, explaining things, how these things work. But other than that, all those other KPIs remain very, achieved all the other goals for those other KPIs. The van pool program is another program that we have, another transportation options, we also call it commuter options program, that is designed for people, group of people who have pretty much similar origin or destination, worksite-wise. In the last quarter, we had provided about 20,000 riders trips in the last Q2. We started with 37 vans, and then we lost a couple of those riders, and then we had to customize those vans to improve the efficiency. And for the month of December, we had 35 vans, and that helps us to reduce the cost slightly from $46,000 to $45,000. But the cost for each van was about $429. The average occupancy rate during the Q2 dropped slightly from 61% in Q1 to 59%, but overall this is still really good numbers. To give you some context, across the country, that general consensus is if it's above 50%, that's a good point to start with. So we're in the about 60s, so that's really good point where we are, but there is still potential to grow for this program, and we're working on that, how we can make this system more efficient and get more people, provide more service to the more people and diverse communities. From the safety and reliability, we track preventable accidents per 1,000 miles and also road calls for all of those different service and modes that we provide. For the locals, the target is to, the goal is to get less than 2 per 1,000 miles preventable accidents. And for overall, I think we had 0.9, so achieve the goal. Similarly for the contracted services, that includes your lift service and Shop and Ride and regional. So we have achieved that. That's pretty much, most of those are less than 2 except for the lift service. Just barely 2.01. we missed it, but the story is in the Q1 of FY24, we had 5 preventable accident events. This time we had 3, so we're heading to the right direction, so that's the message. For the local road calls, all of them have achieved the goals. So the goal is to get less than 1 per 10,000 miles we drive. For the local Cherriots, we have 0.71, and for the regional, 0.13, very low. And then for the lift services, we have 0.34. Another story here is in the Q1, we had 0.49, so significant reduction of the road calls as well. So we're making some good progress. And for the shop and ride, it's 0. So nothing happened, no road calls, so that's a big milestone there. This is it for now, and we will continue to improve this report as we have more additional information available, and I'll be happy to take any question if you may have.
Are there any questions for Chief Azum? Director Laura Mitkif.
Am I on? Thank you, Vice President Davidson, and thank you for, first of all, it's good to see you.
Yep.
We had lunch the other day at the event with Director Duncan, and we're sorry you couldn't make it ever. We missed you, and Alan was there. We were there.
Yeah.
Anyway, good to see you again. Couple things. First, thank you. I'm always, and I'm sure my colleagues are as well, impressed by the clarity with which information is presented. And so I just wanted to, resaltar eso, what do you say? Resaltar, anyway. Highlight that.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. I have a comment and 2 questions. Well, I have a comment, clarification, and a question. My comment is, and I'm not going to get into it, but, which I said it last time we had this conversation, but I can't help but notice Route 16 is way outperforming other coverage routes and is in the middle of the pack of corridor routes, and I just like to name that, and that's it. I gotta name it. I'm glad to see other routes are finally catching up to us. Yeah. And I digress. A very, very slight clarification before a more substantive question, and that is, I noticed that a few goals were asterisked, and their goals were less, and I would appreciate some clarity on that. I can be more specific. I think some of the targets were different in some. For example, Route 45, a target of 5 boardings as opposed to 10 boardings as other routes, and I don't know what clarity you can provide for that.
Yeah, that's a different kind of service that we provide compared to the others. So 45 is a deviated fixed route service, so it's a different kind of service and service model. So that has a separate target in comparison to all the others. So that's why we have an asterisk to mention that. Like all the others, 40X, all the X in the end, so those are all regional services, but only 45 is deviated fixed route that has a separate target. That's why we just want to make sure that we clarify that. 10 for all the other and 5 for the 45. So that's why we have an asterisk of that.
And I'm assuming something similar is true for this Route 7, compared on, this is slide 14. Route 7 has a different target than the other route.
On Route 7 is not deviated fixed route, but that has a lower target. But
it's not a gotcha question. It was just a clarification.
I can get an answer for you, clarify it.
Okay,
after the board meeting. Yeah.
It's not urgent. It was just my own curiosity. My question now turns to congratulations on a 6,000 person ridership increase for lift services. That's awesome. I think I noted this last time, and I'll just note it again, and it's not quite yet my question, that West Salem seems to be underserved and underrepresented in terms of pickups and drop-offs and stuff. And I think we talked about that at length, or at some length last time, and I was kind of constantly returning to that and asking why that is, because I know, speaking from experience, there are plenty of disabled people in West Salem, and I'd like to know why that might be different. That's not really what I want to ask you. The question I really want to ask you is, it's a little bit delicate, but do we track the diversity of disabilities that we serve? Because I'm asking that, I know this is delicate, but I'm asking it because, for example, if we have folks who are using our lift service who are wheelchair users or mobility aid users, that's one thing, and that's great. If folks are low vision or vision impaired, that's another thing. I would imagine a situation in which folks who are deaf or hard of hearing who may not be able to drive it off clinical driving and want to use a lift service, and that's a whole other thing. And to the extent that we can get granular and detailed and specific, and what's the lingo, targeted, in our ability to serve folks, the better. Because if we could stratify or understand the communities that we are serving, we could see under or overrepresentations, rooms for improvement or growth, and maybe identify strategies that we could develop and deploy in terms of increasing ridership for certain disability communities that are not at present receiving the support that they ought to. It's just a question and kind of food for thought for us here and for staff generally.
Deputy General Manager Trimble, do you want to take that?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't hear myself. Thank you for the question. So we do not track disabilities, however, everyone has to go through an eligibility process. So because the nature of the service is that you have to be unable to independently use the fixed route service. So although we may have that information, there's really no statistical reason to look at it, I guess. The only time we really sort of reconcile that is if there's at the time of recertification, which is every 3 years, if I'm not remembering correctly, 3 or 5 years, I can't remember exactly. So we do have that information. Everyone goes through an eligibility process. Some disabilities, people use mobility devices. Some are hidden, but however still preclude individuals from independently using the services, and it may require a personal care assistant and things of that nature. So we gather that information during the eligibility process, but I wouldn't say that we track it in perhaps the sense that you're looking at.
Thank you. May I have a quick follow-up?
Of course.
My follow-up would be, do you see in a way what I'm suggesting, perhaps the merits of engaging with that information beyond eligibility to the extent that it would help us understand exactly who we're serving and the diversity of that community that we're serving, and if there are disparities or ways that we think we might be able to better serve those communities could be informed by that data? Do you think that need exists? Or?
I think we do, and again, thank you for the follow-up. I think we do a fairly good job doing our outreach process,
sure,
during our travel training process to identify some of those very specific issues, and really working with folks. Obviously we want people to have as much independence as possible, so fixed route is always best. If individuals can independently use them, or if they're conditionally eligible and perhaps don't have sidewalks or live in areas where it may be problematic to actually get to a stop. And with those types of disabilities and things of that nature, it is very individualized in how we work with folks. But there's lots of information out there, lots of outreach information out there. We actively go out to different senior centers and other places, and really extol all the great virtues of our paratransit service. So the information's out there, and that's really how it works.
That's fair, and I know that to be true, and if for no other reason than because we have 6,000 more riders in that service than we did last time. So thank you for that.
All right. Director Duncan.
Again, I know this is not the point of your report, but since we have the opportunity, I think it's a great question to ask and just keep in the back of our minds, not necessarily encouraging any action at this time, apart from what we're doing. But I want to highlight this as a thought because, when we think of paratransit, I think the automatic default runs into, mobility aid users or visual impairment, et cetera. And we already are seeing trends, particularly in relation to long COVID, of an increase in heart conditions and lung conditions, especially among young people who may be hesitant to utilize our services, or they're not part of a senior center, they may not be getting that type of assistance. And just because I know a few people in my life that are particularly affected by these conditions, chronic fatigue being another one, and knowing that as an organization we're constantly working to improve our accessibility to our stops, but we are limited in how quickly we can implement more stop shelters, seating, sidewalks, etc. for all the various reasons. Keeping an eye on that population, I think, is worth it, and just something to keep in the back of our minds that very likely we will see this who we serve with these services evolve a bit over the next 5 to 10 years. And I appreciate you mentioning it because it is super delicate, but it's also important to understand that, we did experience what is being coined by some as a mass disabling event, and what we think of as a disability may adjust very significantly over the years. So just something to keep our eye on. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may add something, and everything that is said, I concur with that. And I know that this is very sensitive information, but in addition to that, we have a CSC advisory committee, so they can come up with the issues, and then we can work on solutions. So, especially as you mentioned, the director Laura Metcalf, that visually impaired. So we can work on that if there is a need for the community, and is the lift service, is it sufficient, or should we do more? There are more things we can accomplish. But the thing is, if it comes through the process, and then we better understand the community and then different kind of needs, and then we can work on those. But and we have a process like coming out of those, the committees and then comments and projects and ideas, we go through the process, and then we can work on that, and then find alternative solutions if whatever it takes.
And I do just have one clarifying. So
Please.
we don't prescribe the disabilities. It's your inability to use the service independently. So whatever that may be, long COVID or a myriad of other things, that's the determining factor for eligibility.
Yep.
Other questions? Yeah, Director Navarro.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. So in the report, we have a safety and the reliability trends. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I see broken down vehicles and I get excited. And so, I'm just curious, do we capture...
Could you, for the record, say what you do professionally?
I'm a mechanic.
Okay, thank you.
I'm a mechanic by trade. Sorry. So I see that you're capturing this information. I'm just kind of curious, do we capture more detailed information? For example, do we know, is it the diesel vehicles that are breaking down more often than the compressed natural gas vehicles? And I know this isn't as important right now, but I think in the future, as we start looking to different forms of fuel when we're talking about transportation, we can identify, okay, well, maybe, we shouldn't be investing in compressed natural gas as much as electric or as much as hydrogen because, those vehicles are breaking down as much. And I know that there's different things that go into that, mileage and other, moving parts within a internal combustion engine. But just for giggles, I'd love to read what you got.
Right. That is an excellent question, Director Navarro. So yes, we can provide that information, and along the line, sometime later this year, hopefully we'll go live with the BEBs. So one of the key goals is to track all this information, and then along the line, so BEB KPIs along different ICE, internal combustion engines, and how we're operating we can provide those information once it is handy, and then decide the future investment and have a side-by-side comparison on that. The fuel type, yes, I think we can add that, but and we can definitely work with you if there is any additional clarification on there. The information is available, and we will add more meat to this to these slides down the line. Awesome. And additional KPIs as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the answer. Deputy General Manager Trimble.
Thank you. Director Navarro, thank you. So yes, we have all that information. We track each occurrence. That's really how maintenance sort of decides if there needs to be a campaign, for example, if X component keeps breaking down or if there are particular issues. So it's quite comprehensive. All that is included. Lots depends on the age of the vehicle, if there is a particular issue with the vehicles, but we do keep all of that information. It's quite comprehensive.
Yeah, thank you.
One quick follow-up. When you say campaign, what do you mean?
So, for example, if I'm making this up, if the carburetors on a particular bus fleet are gone or are problematic, then maintenance will do a campaign, which means every single bus will be inspected that has that particular component, and every single bus will run through a battery of tests just to ensure there are no systemic issues.
Got it.
That's called a campaign.
Like a military campaign, we're attacking the carburetors.
I'll take your word for that.
Okay, excellent.
I think a more appropriate example would be like if the door flew off, would we stop all those buses? And
That makes sense, okay. Dre?
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. Shout out on Route 16. It's really overperforming.
It's not my, but thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the call out. And we seem to be really focused on the lift service, and that's what my question is about too. And I think I have a couple. And one is just general. And is it fair to say that our lift users are getting lift trips to locations that they can't reach on, that's not coming out right. Is it fair to say that a person who qualifies for lift services uses fixed route at times and lift at other times? Not in all cases, but in some cases, or is it more binary than that?
Deputy General Manager.
Thank you. Director Carney, thank you for the question. So there is an eligibility process, and it fits you into several buckets. There are those who are fully eligible for all of their paratransit trips if they choose to do so, which means they cannot independently use the fixed route for whatever. There are those individuals who are conditionally eligible. So I can't walk because of breathing issues when it's over 95 degrees or something to that matter. So then on those conditions, when it's above 95 degrees, they would be eligible. If I don't have sidewalks, if there's not the correct accessibility. There's also temporary eligibility. I break my leg, can't use independently the fixed route service. That also gets you eligible. Just there are lots of different reasons that that individuals may be eligible and may choose to use it. And if you're conditionally eligible, well, any eligibility that you have, you can always choose to use the fixed route, and you can certainly use that service with a personal care attendant if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Manager Trimble. And then just looking at these origin destination maps for the drop off and pickup for the lift, it would be interesting just from, as the board representative on the SCATS policy committee, a lot of what we are looking at on that committee is additions or changes to what is included in our transportation improvement plans for the different municipalities and jurisdictions that belong. And it would be interesting, as I'm looking at these locations, two things. One would be they're all inside the urban growth boundary, but everything that is included inside the urban growth boundary for the city of Salem, which is shared with the city of Kaiser, which doesn't seem to have any big dots on it, also includes some unincorporated Marion County. So it's an unusual boundary in the state of Oregon. There's really none like it, where two cities and a county are sharing portions of the urbanized area. So it'd be interesting to know kind of like the split between the jurisdictions. I imagine that, obviously the city of Salem, which has the greatest land mass, but I'm looking at some of these like residents, 224 pickups, work site. Are those in Marion County? How are we providing service within the urban growth boundary to the different jurisdictions? And that isn't data that I would expect you to have kind of off the top of your head at all. But the other would be, as we are looking at transportation improvement plans, what about it? What physical characteristic? Is it all lack of sidewalks, or is it just like a difficult crossing, or people can't get to the work site? Like, what is the physical characteristic of these sites that is preventing people from being able to independently access it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I can start with it. So first one, we have the origin and destination information. I think we can provide that by county and by location. That's available, and we can provide it to you. The second one, I think Deputy General Manager Trimble already mentioned we have different eligibility criteria, so different issues. So some of the solely relying on our lift service and others are partially. So we can explore why is it because sidewalk or is it because of their medical conditions, but we can provide you more details. But we have the robust data for each trips, why they go, what time it is. We have the details, but my understanding was providing the high-level overview for a better understanding, but if we need more details, we have every trip details, who used it, where, from where, when. We have all this information, but if that makes sense, and the trip purpose and all this information.
To be clear, I don't want all that information.
Right.
I was just looking for, like, wow, there's no sidewalks at these 5, and that one has a real long driveway or something like that.
Before I punch it over to staff, I just want to flag that I think a couple weeks ago, General Manager Pollock sent us a list of suggested sidewalk improvements within the city of Salem based on this paratransit data. And it's only relevant to the city of Salem simply because they're the ones undertaking a 10-year bond with dedicated funding for sidewalk improvement. And so I'll put a plug in here that the bond subcommittee for city council, on that you have Mayor Chris Hoy, City Councilor Mickey Varney, and City Councilor Stapleton, as well as 2 community members. But they would be a wonderful contact if you happen to have existing relationships with any of them to say, hey, this is Cherriots' list of high priority sidewalk improvements. We can better serve our community if you make these investments with the funding that you already have. I think that's an ask tailored, or it's an answer tailored to their ask, which is right now considering where to make those sidewalk investments. Manager French.
Thank you. I wanted to, these maps have gathered a lot of conversation. And these maps illustrate the top 10 pickup origin and destinations where lots of people, so those large number of people getting dropped off there are spread throughout the whole city. So if we took and put all of the little all the little dots for each of the West Salem neighborhoods or Kaiser or spread throughout, the trips are picking up all over and going to these major places. So they get picked up all over town and go to these major destinations and get dropped off at, work sites, medical facilities, and then they leave from there and go back to their homes, and they're spread out throughout the community. So this is showing, kind of giving you guys, like, these are big areas where people are going to, but it isn't that there's no trips in those areas that you're seeing. It's that we're talking about the top 10 locations within the city or within the urban growth boundary where these trips are happening. So think of it in that it's showing where the major trip generators are ending and then people are going back home. But you don't have, we do have like the group homes that have lots of trips coming out of them because there's lots of people that are living in those homes that are taking lots of trips. So just as you're thinking about it, that's not all of the trips that you're seeing, because if we show you that, it is just a whole bunch of little dots all over the urban growth. It's going to be meaningless, yeah. So, and I wanted to also follow up the number 7 asterisk. That's Sunday level service. All the routes other than the Route 7 are corridor routes, and the Route 7 is a coverage route that runs on the weekends, and so they have different levels, but we didn't want to have a chart with just one route on it, so that's what the difference is.
And we have a dashboard for this, so if board is interested, we can show you all the details in the VIA dashboard. So I think that if that helps, I see a lot of questions about those maps. I think as Chris mentioned, those are just the top, very general overview. And if you pinpoint that location, there may be nothing, but it's the area in general. So it's not like in that particular point, 800 people goes there in that point. It's just a general idea. But since we have a lot of interest, we can provide you a demonstration of the VIA platform, and then we can show all the details, and we can answer all those questions.
Director Holmstrom.
Yeah, thank you very briefly. And kind of changing tracks here, on Appendix A, this big table that you gave us, I appreciate that. And first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. You have a column there, the first column there is the on-time performance, and I think it's there because of Lyft. You've got information for Lyft, but for all of our other routes, it says no reliable data. And please just confirm my understanding of that, is that that's something the district is working toward getting with the CAT AVL project and other work that the district is doing. And in upcoming months, years, we will have that data.
That is correct. So all those locals and regionals, so the CAT AVL, the synchromatics, GMB synchromatics that we have, we don't have reliable or accurate information, so that's why we're not reporting it. So maybe by fall of this year, or maybe end of this year, we'll have the new CAT AVL system hopefully up and running by the end of this year. So then we can provide those information to the board.
And I'll just, I don't have questions, but I just wanted to flag a few things. One was the regional routes, as noted, none of them are currently meeting our target, but I, again, want to reiterate that I think that there's an opportunity to find some efficiencies with the regional routes. And that, I think you can both do that with the existing funding that we have, and then certainly with additional funding from those regional cities. The other, for the Youth Zero Pass program, I just wanted to flag. So October, this starts in September 22, but the first full month was October 22. And if you look at October 21 data compared to October 23 data, so that's before and then 2 years after, you saw a 126% increase in youth ridership. And that is just phenomenal. And I think it's, like, the number of rides is great, but as I've said in the past, what the rides mean are far more impactful about kids being able to attend school, get an after-school job, or a mom or dad able to take their kid out to wherever they need to go for free. And then the last thing I wanted to flag as maybe a question for another day is that I still would like a better understanding. I really appreciate the Vanpool information. I have a great understanding of costs. The one thing I would really appreciate moving forward is what revenue we get from entities like the state or commuter options, and or are we tapping into funds that otherwise would be used for fixed route services? And not a question for today, but I would love to circle back to that to better understand that, because $100,000 a year isn't a lot, but hey, if we were to allocate a portion of that to fixed route, it's not going to create a new route, but it may, I don't know. As somebody who has used Vanpool, benefited from Vanpool, I'm keenly aware of both sides of this argument that I'm having with myself. So that's why I want more data. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Chief of Zoom, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Next up, our financial report.
I'll ask Chief LaRue to please come forward.
Good evening, Vice President Davidson and members of the board. Tonight I am here to present the second quarter of fiscal year 24 financial overview. So right now, as far as our audits of general health, for our report of independent auditors, deficiencies in internal control, and our fraud and noncompliance audit, this is normally completed by the end of December, so the end of second quarter. This year, with some changes with our accounting firm and a merger and various other issues, we extended, so that's being wrapped up at the end of February. So that will be filed at the end of February, so in Q3. And for our NTD agreed upon procedures review, again, that is in process, and that will be wrapped up here within a few weeks also. That's filed with NTD. When that happens, the auditors create a letter and we file that at that time. For transparency, the GFOA Excellence in Financial Reporting Award, we did finally receive our new plaques, so we have room for 14 more on that one. No pressure at all. And that review for FY23 will begin on March 1st after the annual comprehensive financial report is filed at the end of February. And on the next page, for the general fund financial performance, revenues are at 74%. That's normal, the normal trend for this time of year because of property taxes that come in November. And our expenditures are at 44%. They should be at 50% or below to be on track. And so 44%, all divisions of the district are well within our budget currently. The Transportation Programs Fund revenues are trending at 15%, which is again normal because the majority of those revenues come in at the end of the fiscal year. So we're right on track there. The expenditures are at 40%. Again, they should be at 50% or less. The Capital Fund, we're at 30% of revenue, which, you know, much of that was due to the battery electric buses in the first quarter. So the Q2 numbers are year-to-date numbers. The expenses are at 44%. And in this last quarter, some of our expenditures were for the battery electric bus infrastructure, the contactless fare payment system, the 4 expansion buses, the transit signal priority work, technology equipment, and South Salem Transit Center. So we've had a lot going on in Q2. And as far as the strategic plan, we heard tonight about all of the wonderful work that is being done. But this is where we're at as far as what we have spent on it so far this year. The climate action plan, the procurement will begin in Q3, so we have nothing for that yet as of Q2. The battery electric buses, the total that we have spent for buses and infrastructure through Q2 are $11.5 million. The surveys that we also saw tonight, obviously those expenses will come through in Q3. The e-fare implementation, that project is now complete, and the expenses total year to date that we paid for that were $182,000. The Cherriots Intelligent Transportation System, we have not yet had any expenditures for that, but the project has begun. I believe that the first invoice just came in recently, so nothing in Q2. The clean and safe passenger amenities, so the additional facilities maintenance staff that were hired through this last budget process. Year to date, we have spent $45,000 on that additional labor to keep those amenities clean for our passengers. And then, of course, the employee engagement survey is scheduled for Q4. Are there any questions that I could answer?
Any questions for Chief LaRue? I have one question and maybe one request. For the, if I heard you correctly, the fraud and noncompliance, the annual review, with that now being completed in Q3 as opposed to Q2, did we miss any deadlines with that?
No, we filed an extension.
Excellent, perfect. And then my one request is, and feel free to, I don't expect you to have these answers now, but as we have, talked about property taxes and the impact that they've had on our district, I would love a better understanding of what that impact is. And so in my mind, the delta or the difference between what the real market value is within our urban growth boundary of properties versus what the assessed value is. I can make some guesses on what that is, but I'd love a number. I would hope that the individual county assessor's offices could readily provide that information. And then compression, that's the other piece here, especially on the east side of the river, that I'm wondering how much we're losing out to compression there. So that's just a request that for my better understanding, since we're so dependent on property taxes right now.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and proceed to the general manager's report.
Yes, thank you. I do have a couple items. So first, you should have in your spaces your talking points and notes for district activities. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the survey results that you heard earlier tonight. And I'll use the Kansas City example, because our presenter was from Kansas City, and the Chiefs have won back-to-back and are looking for a three-peat. I would suggest that Cherriots has already three-peated by the three waves. Anyone can have a good day or a bad day, but having three waves of survey results that show generally consistent results shows it's not a fluke. It's how we do things at Cherriots, and we should all be proud of that. And rightfully so, we recognize the frontline workers, the transit operators, and customer service folks. But it really takes a total team effort to make those kinds of things happen. For example, and rightfully they are the front line and they get the direct impact. But for example, the rest of the team can have a huge impact on those scores. And we don't do any of this for a good score. The score is the reward for what we do every day. But just to give you an idea, because I want to make sure we recognize the whole team, and we're doing that. So next month, we're recognizing transit operators and maintenance folks on Transit Operator and Maintenance Appreciation Day. And then the next month, we're having organization-wide Employee Appreciation Day because of that team effort. So I always think, for example, the operator who may have a sick family member who's having trouble with their health insurance, and they come to HR and they work with the benefits administrator to help get all that sorted out. Well, that has a direct impact on the impact they make on the customer, because they walk away feeling good that their organization is taking care of them, and they're passing that feeling into their customer interaction. Vice versa, if it's a bad experience, they could have a bad one. So I would suggest everything that every person does in the organization has that indirect impact on those results. And so we'll be making sure we do a total team recognition for that. And in addition to that, so a couple weeks ago, I did attend the Special Districts Association annual meeting, which I've gone to from time to time. It's important because we are a special district in the state of Oregon, and it's, first it's interesting to see all the special districts that they have here in Oregon. But had some good sessions on some HR and legal, and a great one on artificial intelligence and the impact it has on governments. And so that's something we need to take a look at. I also want to remind everyone that is attending that the COGS annual meeting is next week. So look forward to seeing many of you there. And earlier tonight, the Joint Committee on Transportation met and held a work session on Senate Bill 1572, which is the West Advisory Committee. And I can tell you that it was passed out of committee unanimously and now has been referred to Ways and Means. So it's moved on to the next step. So that is good. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, General Manager Pollack. Director Holmstrom, would you like to start us off with board member committee reports?
Certainly, thank you, Vice President Davidson. So earlier this week on Tuesday, I had the opportunity to meet with the Community Advisory Committee at their regular meeting. It was kind of a time of transition for them. They had some folks who'd been on that committee for a long time, had just transitioned off. The board recently appointed two new folks to join. This was their first time joining that meeting. So it was a little bit new chair, a little bit new, different faces in the group. So good to see that. CFO LaRue came to provide the committee with a kind of a overview, a kind of abbreviated version of what we saw tonight to the committee, and the committee had some questions for her about different pieces of that. So appreciate her time, and it was a good presentation. And then I can say the bulk of the committee meeting was really about talking or starting to get a handle on, so what do we want to do as a committee, right? What does the committee want, or what does the board want out of the committee? And so I think they're starting to think about that, and I think that's something, my understanding, the board is going to take this up at a work session in the next couple of months here. So I think it'll be useful to kind of revisit that and think about what might be giving them some good tasks to work on, something that would be valuable for them, and then think about the structure of how that's going to work and work best for the community and the district and the board. Thank you.
Director Duncan.
Thank you so much. So we had DEI subcommittee meeting, and we met on February 2nd with President Enos Pressey and Director Laura Midkiff. And we talked about a couple of things that kind of have already been mentioned this evening, but we were excited to learn that John Mathis from Temecula Community College will be attending the board work session on March 14th, and we will get like a condensed version of the 6-week DEI certificate course that Temecula is offering, so you all can look forward to that. I know you're on the edge of your seats like I am, so I'm kind of a nerd about these things, so I'm going to force you all to be excited about it. So we're very excited about that. And then, so the full version of the course is going to be provided to the staff DEI committee champions. So they're going to get access to the full course that we're going to get the little mini preview of. The course aims to equip employees with necessary skills to lead an internal DEI committee. So we're doing what we can to give them the skills to be successful, which I didn't come up with this. We're just helping with it. And I just really appreciate the team being so thoughtful in how to make this effective and actually work. And I really appreciate that. After the course training, the initial focus of the committee is going to be to establish a charter, and that will serve as their guiding document going forward. We want to do as much as we can to provide the right resources and space for staff to create community connection through honoring diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm just personally very excited about this program, and I can't wait to see how staff respond to it and to see what they come up with internally. And we're just going to be here as, resources for when and if they need us. But quite frankly, I think that we're going to give them the tools to succeed, and I think they're going to impress us. So I'm very excited about it. Please keep an eye out for our Black History Month Heritage Bus, which was launched on February 12th. If you guys have not seen the photos or in person, I'm very happy. I think it turned out really nicely. Thank you, everybody who helped work on that project. The subcommittee budgeted for 3 buses during the 2024 calendar year. So many of you are familiar, we did the Pride Bus last year, and so we wanted to expand on that program. The committee, we decided to share the love, as they say, by choosing our next Heritage Bus wrap to celebrate Immigrant Heritage Month for the month of June. And we want to confirm our commitment to continue to support the LGBTQ community. We're intending to continue our Pride commitments and to being supportive, but given that we only have budget for 3 buses this year, and they did go last year, we're going to do Immigrant Heritage Month instead. And this was a very difficult decision. We talked about it at length, and we are hoping to be able to continue to bring back the wraps or similar themes to what we've done in the past in the future, but we're doing what we can with the resources that we have. So that's where we're at this point in time. And then I do have a couple other updates, very short. MWAC was a bit brief on things that were particularly applicable to Cherriots. There are some cool ODOT grants, most of which are for smaller communities, though not ourselves. And there's some exciting things going on there, not necessarily anything that's directly impactful at this time. And then I was also very lucky to attend the chamber luncheon that was present with Andrea Salinas, and we got to hear her talk on quite a few issues. And it was nice to get a little shout out about particularly the South Salem Transit Center and the funding that we received for that. She talked on a myriad of issues. I do believe there's a recording. Yeah, so it was really nice to be able to sit down with everybody, and it's always nice to see Cherriots representatives who I don't always get to see when we go to these events. I like that they're able to get out in the community with us, and I appreciate that we support that. And while we were at that event, we got to chat with some other members of the community, and after chatting with a couple of different people, some city councilors, it made me realize it's been a while since we had a joint session with city council. And it might be, I just wanted to highlight that it might be ripe for that again. I've got some ideas of some topics maybe that we could cover with them. I know there's some members that we haven't worked with before, and it might be nice to all get together again. So wanted to highlight that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Duncan. I'll skip over President Hinojosa Pressey, but I do want to acknowledge her. Today is her birthday. So to wherever you are, President Hinojosa Pressey, happy birthday.
Should we sing it?
Let's all record individually and send. Yeah. Director Carney.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. And thank you, Director Duncan. I love the idea of a joint meeting with the Salem City Council. I think that could be really productive. I think collaborative meetings in general are a great place for learning and sharing and coming up with new ideas. So let's see, I attended the OMPOC meeting. Pretty sure that acronym is the Oregon Metropolitan Planning Organization Consortium. So the MPOs from all around, thanks for the head nods. MPOs from all around the state getting together to talk about issues of statewide importance. So there was a presentation from ODOT on, and members of the federal government on greenhouse gas emissions targets, I think, and reporting from MPOs around the state and the changes to that system. I have a lot of learning to do. There were 0 packet materials. There was just an agenda for OMPOC. And so it was a lot of kind of listening as hard as I could. And then we had a call from school, so I wasn't able to stay for the whole meeting. I had to go pick up a child. But not before we got a legislative presentation from Metro staff, so the Portland region, talking about the issues and presenting to the group on what they were paying attention to. The largest issues are both things that we have discussed with our CFM team and on our legislative committee, and those being the Measure 110 reform and housing production. And that was about all they had, the brain and like person power to pay attention to in the Capitol. Related, our legislative committee did not meet this month. There are 2 weeks left in Oregon's short legislative session. The major focus for our governor is on housing, and it looks like her bill 1537, which is focused on that, will move. And as General Manager Pollock noted, the WES bill is moving forward. And unfortunately, also related to the legislative session, I had to miss the chamber luncheon. We get a lot of media requests, it turns out, during this time. So I don't know what I think I'm doing, volunteering for a lunch. The SCATS Policy Committee will meet next Tuesday. I appreciate the great conversation on the letter and the process moving forward. So I really look forward to reporting back to this body next month on how the meeting went. And that is all I have to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Carney. Director Navarro.
Thank you, Vice President Davidson. The STIF Act, the State Transportation Improvement Fund Advisory Committee is meeting next month, and so I don't have much to report there. But for Kaiser, one thing that I was able to attend with the executive director of a community-based organization in Kaiser and Pastor Dominguez from La Luz de Valle Church in Kaiser was the Salem Gun Violence Town Hall. So Salem recently had a town hall to address the increase in violence, more specifically amongst youth and young adults in the community, and it was a really enlightening conversation. It felt like everybody was kind of on the same page in that the biggest issue is that there's a lack of resources for our youth in the community when it comes to housing, when it comes to food insecurity, when it comes to activities and ways to express themselves. And so the Salem Police Department says that they're going to continue the conversation. I think the next meeting is going to be, this one was at the Elsinore Theater downtown, but they're going to be moving the next one over to Northeast Salem and continue talking with neighborhood associations around the community to figure out how can we address this issue. At that same meeting, I was able to, I was handing out surveys to youth to try to figure out, like, what is it that they want? Because we got to hear from adults, so let's hear from the youth. And so we got a bunch of feedback back from the youth, and it was that they wanted more things to do in the community. Surprise there, right? And so we're working really hard in Kaiser to figure out, how do we build on that? Because there's, for the lack of services that Salem has, that is even worse for Kaiser. So how do we create more opportunities for youth to be able to do, positive things in the community of Kaiser? And so I'm working with Pastor Dominguez on that. We're working with the Kaiser Police Department and the Salem Kaiser, McNary, Salem Kaiser School District, to be able to figure out how do we have our own town hall to focus on those issues and really have a Kaiser-centric answer to those issues. So that's going to be coming up. I got to attend the Coffee with Kathy this last weekend, which is always awesome. I love joining that and hearing from the different leaders in the community of Kaiser. We got to hear from the Kaiser Police Department and their car seat clinic that they have coming up. We got to hear from Chemeketa Community College and some of the awesome programs that they have to support people that are trying to get a degree by lowering the barriers to entry when it comes to college. So that looks like a couple different things, but one of the things that I took away was the ability to get it was like a medical degree or a degree in the healthcare field in a shorter time frame. And so that's being like a traditional healthcare worker, that's being like a addictions counselor, things like that, to kind of get folks' foot in the door, which I really appreciated. Let's see, and I want to remind folks that on Monday, this coming Monday, the 26th, Kaiser will be having the Strategic Planning Task Force meeting at Kaiser City Hall. So I'd like to encourage folks to join that at 6 p.m. And just have your voice heard. We got to hear from a little bit of feedback from the city manager, Adam Brown, at this most recent city council meeting. And he got some really good feedback, and we'd like to keep providing feedback and support Kaiser and growing to be the welcoming community that I know it can be. Let's see, and then I will end with tomorrow is Friday, and that means the Southeast Kaiser Community Center is going to be having their community dinner. And so I'd really like to encourage folks that live in the area to join us and enjoy a free meal, be able to hang out with your neighbors, and maybe enjoy the community garden while the sun's still out.
Thank you. Director Laura Meadkeefe.
Yeah, thank you, Vice President Davidson. Two things. I was unable to go to the WSBA meeting today. We had a medical emergency in the family. I wouldn't be able to go. But my understanding was that I hope is that it was an interesting presentation about the Lower Snake River Dam. Dams have been top of mind for WSBA recently by Salem Electric. And I think the last presentation was there was no meeting in January. The last one I went to was Councilor Varney talking about salmon management. And so that is, if folks are interested in that, maybe you should come to the WSBA meeting. I don't know what next month's going to be, but it'll be good, I'm sure. The second one is a little bit more serious. And that is, as you may recall, last time we came together as a board. We talked about safety in transit, and Mr. Penn was here, and we had an exchange, all of us here on the board with him and together in conversation, and. We talked in particular about a legislative initiative that has now passed the Senate, which I learned about this morning when I was reading the paper. And just for folks, just to ground ourselves in conversation here, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but that would be SB 1553, and it's gone on to the House, and I anticipate it will be adopted in the House and likely signed into law. And as part of these trends for Measure 110 reform, and we talked about it already, but as a primary, it basically modifies the language around what constitutes a crime of interrupting and interfering with public transportation to include, and then I wrote down the language here, unlawfully possessed substance while, on a public transit vehicle or in public transit spaces. And my understanding, after receiving clarity, is that we have not formally been a part of moving this process along in any way. And I'm not speaking for the board, I'm speaking for myself here, but I'm very much against this initiative for the basic reason that, and then I already articulated it last time, and I'll say it again. Tonight, I am generally not in favor of bringing carcerality into public transportation. And I don't believe, personally, that rendering our public transit system more carceral makes it a safer environment for folks. Especially for folks who have some substance abuse disorders or anything of that ilk. And one of the things that this bill does, and if adopted, would graduate these offenses to a Class A misdemeanor. It identifies persons. It does not distinguish between minors or adults. And the penalty would be at most a year in jail or a $6,000 fine, which if you're a youth, you can't pay, so jail. And so to me, this is a dangerous precedent, and it doesn't, in my opinion, address or solve or offer any recourse to the sorts of problems I think its champions are trying to overcome and to solve. So why do I bring this? I don't bring it just to air out dirty laundry per se, but and I'll add, it amends ORS 166.025, which already has hazardous and physical offensive conditions by any act which the person is not licensed or privileged to do as something that constitutes, unacceptable behavior in the law. So I'm not even really sure what this does. Basically, I'm bringing it up not to air out dirty laundry, as I said, but to raise material questions around what our, as a transit agency, the second largest in the state, what our obligations are in light or in the face of these changes that I anticipate, if not in this form, but in some other form, are coming. Specifically, three things, at least, the three that I can think of right now. The first is, we've been celebrating this, as we ought to, youth ridership, for example. And I'm disappointed, or I'm sad to see that Manager Garcia is no longer here with us. I think she was here earlier tonight, and she could speak to this, I think, at greater length, and I hope does in the future. But we saw in our report that a number of the assaults and kind of problematic behavior were youth who were intoxicated or otherwise taking substances and who cause disruptions and sometimes even engage physically with staff. Are these people that we would be recommending to law enforcement and being sent to be standing trial and doing this thing? These are the sorts of questions I'm asking myself. So I think from staff in the immediate future, and again, this is just me asking and saying it, but I would appreciate data around this. What percentage of our youth are we kind of, if adopted, or would be complicit in sending into the criminal justice system? And broadly, what is the general bill impact on Cherriots if this bill passes and is adopted as is? What is the impact on our services, the way we conduct business, and just general food for thought. And so this was, in summary, this was an abstract conversation that started some time ago. It's less abstract now, and I think we should start thinking about it more critically. And I'm against it.
Thank you, Director. I won't speak to the bill in particular, but I do think that there's an opportunity for us as a public entity to think a little more strategically coming with future legislative sessions. There is, especially with the 2025 session coming up where transportation will be front of mind, I think there's an opportunity for us to do some legislative learning earlier, and then we can proactively outline our vision for the different concerns that many different constituencies raise, of which we serve all of them. And so I'll just say that. As for my report, For the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, we, on Wednesday, we met as a legislative committee, and we had a presentation about land value taxes, which I imagine some of you all, when I say that word, gets you very excited, and I appreciate that in you. For others, it probably bores you, and I also appreciate that. It's part of our effort, and I only bring this up because it's a common issue that we've identified, which is the broken property tax system in Oregon. It was broken when I was, I think, 2 years old, and so anyways, that's all to say that there were different electorates at different times that are not the current electorate made decisions that are having impacts for certainly us in this room, but as I think about my 2 daughters, for them and many other generations. And so thinking through possible solutions to rectify this very obvious issue that is destroying and crippling local governments. Thankfully, we have largely avoided serious and protracted crises like other local governments, but we are not immune from these impacts. So I'm not saying that land value tax is the solution, but I think we, as well as many other governments, need to take a very long, hard look at what are those solutions. I'm under no illusions that this is an easy conversation, particularly given the constitutional nature of these changes that were made in the 90s. But yeah, just some food for thought and sharing what we've been talking about over at COG. I again want to echo General Manager Pollock's invitation to attend the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments annual dinner next Wednesday. There's currently 150 people signed up, which is a record in recent memory for Council of Governments annual dinners. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and yeah, looking forward to it. For the Service Enhancement Subcommittee, we did meet earlier today, so I don't have a super detailed report out for you all. We will again meet in 2 weeks, but we did talk in broad strokes about some of the what I'll call facts on the ground about what moving forward on a service enhancement plan might be. What are some of those opportunities? What are some of the risks? And then we spent a fair amount of time talking about what a service enhancement plan might look like, what a phased approach might look like, what those phases might be. This is all very preliminary. In our next meeting, we'll maybe dig in a little bit deeper in what some of those phases might look like. This is, of course, not something that we're doing in a vacuum. This is something that will engage the board in moving forward. But I just want to stress that many of the decision points that need to be made quickly. I know 2026 sounds really far off, but ordinances need to be passed well in advance of this. Requests for proposals need to be out on the street to engage third-party businesses to help us with these initiatives. So even if you might think for a moment that this is further off, it's not. And that is both exciting and also a little daunting. And with that, that concludes my report, though I do have an ask. I would love a picture of the plaque, of the GFOA plaque. I want to blast that out into the community that not only have we won this award repeatedly, but we ran out of space on the plaque, the first plaque. We now have a second plaque. Watch out, world. Anyways, that concludes our agenda for this evening. Thank you to everyone. And before we conclude, I do want to say that I really do appreciate this board and the thoughtfulness. The discussion that we had earlier about the letter to send to another government, I think, was emblematic of the kind of not only cordiality that we have amongst ourselves, but the thoughtfulness that we have as we take action. And I'm excited to see that continue. So with that, we're adjourned.